Good morning, everybody. Welcome to SG Trader, the live trading channel. You can follow us for free, copy our trades, and make some profit if you want to. If you're looking at our strategy, you need to check our description on our channel and get the strategy. We trade live our own funds in front of you and our customers so they can see how their investment growing.
Your high street has been adapting and finding new ways to work. And so has Lewis here.
Hiya, I'm Lewis.
AKA owner of Dunn's Bakery. AKA bakery website manager. AKA deliverer of delicacies. Inspired by shop owners like Lewis, Visa is supporting other businesses to adapt. Shop local. Visa.
Yields trade at 43 basis points, so just down 1.5 basis points. US yields at 62 basis points. And just lastly, in terms of the update on the markets for you, we do have that OPEC Plus meeting this week. WTI crude futures are down 1.3%, 1.2% lower for Brent crude, and gold is also weaker, 0.1%. So that's a quick look at where we are in terms of the market open this morning.
Right, let's have a look at what the stocks are to watch this morning with Bloomberg's Morwenna Conium joining us down the line from Dublin. So, Morwenna, we start off with Swatch. They've come out with their first half operating figures, and it's a loss rather wider than estimates.
Yes, so Swatch reported an operating loss of $347 million for the first half of the year in US dollars. But they have said that they expect a profit for the whole year. So they've been hit by countries having lockdown measures, closing shops, all those travel bans. People aren't going and buying luxury watches, particularly, in China. But that pent-up demand, has already made June a profitable month, they say. So they are seeing that rising again. And they've made a lot of job cuts this year, trimmed their retail network. In fact, 260 stores have been closed for good. And the shares have already fallen 28% this year. So it's not all a negative picture for Swatch this morning, despite that, top-line disappointing results for the first half. Shares have only just already started trading, and they are slightly positive.
Yes, I mean, hardly changed at all. I was watching them just now. But let's talk about HelloFresh, because it's an interesting, in terms of food delivery, that kind of thing. What's been happening everywhere, of course, has tended to suggest that would work well for those sort of companies. And they've seen a second quarter revenue, adjusted EBITDA, significantly above estimates.
Yes, so they are one of the beneficiaries of the consumer impact of the pandemic. They offer subscriptions and recipes and meal ideas, obviously done quite well out of that with people being at home. Their second quarter preliminary revenue has significantly exceeded the latest market expectations, they say, which they determine is about 789 million euros. And they say that the year-on-year revenue growth in both USA and international divisions has exceeded 100%. So they've raised their revenue growth forecast for 2020 on a constant currency basis to between 55% and 70%. It had been between 40 and 55 before. So shares have already risen a lot this year. It's no secret that they've been doing well, up 165% before today, and now the shares are still gaining further, up about 4% this morning.
Yeah, looking pretty good on this morning. Thanks very much indeed for that. That was Morwenna Coniam joining us with Stocks to Watch this morning.
Yeah, good stuff. Let's take you to our top stories now, shall we? And we start here in the UK. The National Security Council is meeting today to decide on the fate of Chinese tech giant Huawei's role in Britain's 5G mobile network. Bloomberg's Charles Capel reports.
In January, Boris Johnson's government allowed a partial and limited involvement from the Chinese company. But after reviewing the decision, the government might order companies to stop buying Huawei kit and start to remove its technology from existing infrastructure. That operation would take at least 5 years for the 5G network alone, according to BT's CEO, Philip Janssen, who said a change of direction could lead to more short-term risk. Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden will announce the decision in Parliament this afternoon. In London, Charles Capel, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Meanwhile, tensions also rising between China and the US. The Trump administration rejected Beijing's expansive claims in the South China Sea. The move reverses a previous policy of not taking sides in territorial disputes in the region. In the past, the US has called for protecting freedom of navigation in the contested waterway while stopping short of taking a position on specific territorial claims.
Meanwhile, in terms of the data, China's imports and exports both rose unexpectedly in June, even as the pandemic raged globally. Bloomberg's Brian Curtis has more on that from Hong Kong.
Exports rose 0.5% from a year ago, while imports expanded 2.7%. Compare that to May's drop of imports to the tune of more than 16%. Both imports and exports had been forecast to fall. In yuan terms, the numbers looked even better. Even so, trade remains uneven as some economies are forced to reopen more slowly due to the pandemic. Still, positive net exports will help China's GDP growth after the historic 6.8% collapse in the first quarter. In Hong Kong, Brian Curtis, Bloomberg, Daybreak Europe.
And the story that's dominating headlines here in the UK this morning on the pandemic, face masks are to become compulsory in shops in England. The government's expected to confirm the change in policy later today. It'll come into effect from July the 24th, and it follows the introduction of a similar rule in Scotland. Yesterday, Boris Johnson hinted that a shift of approach was coming, and he pointed to new evidence.
What's been interesting on the face coverings issue in the last few months is that the scientific sort of evaluation of face coverings and their importance in stopping aerosol droplets, that's been growing.
The police will now be able to fine those who don't comply up to £100.
There are also tentative signs of recovery here in the UK when it comes to the retail sector, but it is giving little cause for optimism about the beleaguered high street, because total retail sales, whilst they rose in June for the first time year on year, according to the British Retail Consortium, a separate survey from Barclaycard said that this was down effectively to the doubling of online shopping. Over half of consumers actually saying that they are continuing to avoid the shops. Spending on non-essential items remains 22% lower than a year earlier, despite strong gains in home improvement, sports and outdoor outlets. When it also comes to UK news, Roger, I do think that our listeners should tune in later on today, 3:30 p.m, because the Office for Budget Responsibility Chairman Robert Choate will be speaking to us. He's the outgoing chairman, of course, but I think it'll be very interesting to hear what he has to say as the UK's debt mountain continues to pile up.
Yes, it's a big issue for the UK, and he's one of the most seasoned commentators on these matters, a voice of some authority there. But when it comes to the European Union Recovery Fund, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel and Italy's Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte have shown a united front, at least stated on Monday when they met, days ahead of the crucial EU summit on this. Bloomberg's Patrick Donahue reports.
Merkel warned that a response to the economic fallout has to be massive. As she hosted Conte outside Berlin, the German leader threw her support behind a €750 billion proposal to help member states out of the turmoil. Italy, the original epicenter of the pandemic in Europe, has called on EU states, above all Germany, to show solidarity. Merkel said negotiators are still far apart on an agreement. In Berlin, Patrick Donahue, Bloomberg Daybreak, Europe.
And finally, in top corporate news, several of the US's biggest banks, including JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup and Wells Fargo, open their books today as second quarter earnings season begins. Bloomberg's Larry Kofsky has the preview.
All eyes will be on the bank's defense mechanisms to counter the fallout from the coronavirus pandemic, and loan loss provisions, which surged in the first quarter as pandemic lockdowns took hold, are expected to climb further. Nationwide stay-at-home orders are also expected to have reduced income from service charges and credit card fees, a cornerstone of the bank's growth in recent years. Analysts expect a profit of about $1.04 per share at JP Morgan Chase and 38 cents at Citigroup. Wells Fargo is projected to lose about 7 cents. Larry Kofsky, Bloomberg Daybreak, Europe.
Right, let's get the latest in global news from Leanne Gerrans. Leanne, good morning, and you begin with the virus position globally.
Yes, indeed, Roger. Good morning. As global coronavirus cases pass 13 million, the World Health Organization says COVID-19 probably won't disappear in the coming months. WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus is also warning about confusing government responses.
The only aim of the virus is to find people to infect. Mixed messages from leaders are undermining the most critical ingredient of any response: trust.
Meanwhile, in Australia, Queensland has imposed quarantine on anyone entering the state from hotspots in neighbouring New South Wales. Japan's government is also warning a new state of emergency is possible if infections continue increasing. And California has declared a sweeping rollback of newly reopened businesses, closing restaurants, bars and cinemas. Now to Europe. In France, Emmanuel Macron is preparing to address the nation later today. Bloomberg's Anya Nussbaum says the president will use the Bastille Day celebrations to unveil a new direction for the final 2 years of his term.
Macron is seeking to reboot his presidency following criticisms on how his government handled the coronavirus crisis. Macron is mulling a fresh stimulus plan that should be unveiled at the end of August. Whether Macron speaks about his plans for new tax cuts, boosting youth employment, or investing in public hospitals, it will be a balancing act. In Paris, Anya Nussbaum, Bloomberg Daybreak, Europe.
And European Union judges in Luxembourg are set to issue 2 crucial rulings affecting the tech sector this week. First up will be a judgment on the EU's decision to slap a €13 billion Irish tax-back bill on Apple. In a separate ruling, the EU's top court will decide on the legality of tools used to ship vast amounts of commercial data across the Atlantic without violating data privacy rules. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than from 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Caroline.
Thank you so much, Leanne, for that world news update. Now, coming up next on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, US-China tensions rise again. Washington rejects Beijing's claims in the South China Sea. US senators face sanctions from China. We're going to delve into what is actually a century-old dispute amongst a number of countries over sea claims in the South China Sea. It's going to be potentially a flashpoint in the world. That's coming up
red
next.
all over the European markets as we're 15 minutes into the European opening. This is Bloomberg.
For the Jewish Communal Fund, Noel Spiegel, former senior partner with Deloitte & Touche and past JCF president, discusses the advantages of a donor-advised fund over a private foundation.
There's a lot involved in having a private foundation. You need to engage attorneys, you need to engage accountants, file tax returns. At JCF, all of that is done for you. You don't have to get involved in anything other than making your contribution to your fund and then determining which grants that you want to make.
A JCF fund may be opened with a minimum $5,000 contribution of cash or appreciated securities and can be used as an alternative to or together with a private foundation.
If you have a foundation, you have to list all of the contributions that you made. Potentially anybody, because the information is public, can find out exactly which organizations a foundation has made charitable contributions to.
Let JCF simplify your philanthropy and protect your privacy. Learn more about JCF's private client group at jcfny.org.
The Boston Symphony Orchestra presents BSO at Home. While you stay inside, enjoy a curated collection of archived concerts and behind-the-scenes stories from BSO musicians. BSO Homeschool provides lessons for music lovers of all ages. New performances and messages from musicians are added regularly. Enjoy these selections and much more at bso.org/at-home.
If you love them enough to listen to them practice the same song on tuba,
please be done.
Over and over and over and over and over, then surely you'll check nhtsa.gov/the right seat to make sure they're correctly buckled in the back seat.
Sounds good, honey.
Check today at nhtsa.gov/the right seat. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Influential conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's Yvonne Mann.
To Hong Kong, a resurgence of new coronavirus cases has led the city government to bring back social distancing measures after reopening the economy for about 2 months. And they seem to be stricter than what we saw in the first and second wave. Joining us now is Dr. Gabriel Leung, Dean of Medicine at the University of Hong Kong. Do you think that the government was too early in lifting some of the early restrictions?
I think that if one does a sort of backward look now with the 2020 retrospectoscope, then you wonder whether we have maybe had some potential frailties in terms of inadequate testing of the exempted people who come into Hong Kong. And these are mostly air and sea crew, ship crew. Obviously, they need to come into Hong Kong because we need them to pilot the airplanes or the ships, but we hadn't been testing them. So I think that loophole has now been plugged, and now we are now leveraging the private sector, hoping that the private sector would give a very, very substantial boost to the testing numbers, even though we are already testing quite intensively by global standards.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings.
Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Good morning, I'm Sandra Kilhoff with this Bloomberg Business Flash, and we're about 17 minutes into the European trading day with most major markets in the red this morning. The CAC 40 leading declines, currently down 1.6%, the DAX slipping 1.5%, the Stock 600 lower by 1.4%, and the FTSE down by 0.9%. In London, we are seeing US futures fairly flat, and it all follows a down day in Asian trading as investors digest fresh US-China tensions after the Trump administration rejected China's claims in the South China Sea, sending all Asian benchmarks lower this morning. In stock specifics, I'm keeping a close eye on HelloFresh, gaining 4% in Frankfurt this morning after its adjusted EBITDA came in significantly above estimates. We are seeing Ocado, however, a bit weaker in London, trading down about 2% at the moment, despite reporting a beat on its first half results. The dollar, meanwhile, gaining a bit, up 0.1% this morning. We're seeing the yen holding at 107.3, sterling a bit weaker at 125, the euro holding at 113. I'm keeping a close eye on the Korean won, down 0.4% this morning after South Korea doubled its spending plan to recover from the coronavirus. The yuan also weaker today, despite Chinese trade data beating expectations. 10-year Treasury yields holding at 62 basis points. 10-year bund yields a bit weaker at negative 43. 10-year gilt yields currently at 16 basis points, down 3 basis points this morning. Gold trading at $1,799 a troy ounce, and we're seeing oil declining ahead of that OPEC Plus meeting. The group may taper historic production cuts, and that's sending WTI down almost 2% to $39 a barrel. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Len Garens with more on what's going on around the world.
Sandra, thank you. Face masks are to be made compulsory in shops in England from July the 24th. The move comes after pressure from the opposition, unions and business groups who've accused the government of lacking clarity in its guidance for defeating the pandemic. England made face coverings compulsory on public transport last month, but left them optional for shoppers. In the U.S., the likely Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden is to call for the setting of a 100% clean electricity standard for the U.S. by 2035. According to people familiar with the plans, Biden will also commit to investing $2 trillion on clean energy over 4 years. The proposals mark a strengthening of the plan Biden proposed while fighting for nomination. And tensions between Ethiopia and Egypt have increased over a disputed dam project on the Nile's main tributary. African Union talks ended without any agreement over the speed at which Ethiopia wants to fill the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam on the Blue Nile. Egypt is concerned it will lose control over its water supply. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg Caroline.
Thank you so much, Leanne. Well, from a dam to an even larger body of water, the Trump administration has rejected Beijing's claims to large parts of the South China Sea, reversing Washington's previous policy of not taking sides in territorial disputes in the area. At the same time, Anglo-Sino tensions are set to ramp up here in the UK today, because we're expecting to hear about a ban of Huawei technology from the 5G mobile networks in Britain. For more, let's bring in Bloomberg senior editor Derek Warbank. Derek, good to speak to you. Look, how significant is this change by the US when it comes to the South China Sea, which is, hotly disputed?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty significant change in posture from the American side. The U.S. had been concerned for some while and registered its displeasure with the way that China was going about staking its claims within the South China Sea, but hadn't really stated a position on whether or not the claims were valid. They have done that now. The U.S. position aligns fairly squarely with literally every other country that China is in dispute with in the South China Sea. And if you think about China and sort of its territorial claims, it winds up having territorial disputes with actually quite a large number of countries on both land and water borders. China has preferred to try and keep these things as one-on-one negotiations, telling every other country to get out. But that also allows China to have those discussions in a sort of power asymmetric way. If the U.S. is saying that the position is not valid at all, it's without merit, then that gives a big boost, if you will, to the positions of your Vietnams, your Malaysias, et cetera, of the world.
So, Derek, I suppose one could, as an outsider, see this as a kind of mutual ramping up, a tit for tat, because, of course, yesterday we had those sanctions announced by Beijing against U.S. officials. Is this just simply going to escalate further? What more is going to happen?
You could see it as a bit of a tit for tat. You certainly would see it as an escalation. I don't think there's any question about that. I think to what you mentioned yesterday, the sanctions tit for tat, That one actually was kind of interesting because I don't actually think that the U.S. saw it as a meaningful escalation. It was just sort of a thing that was done. Indeed, the two Republican senators who got sanctioned by China seemed to be quite pleased at it. And Ted Cruz may as well write it off as a campaign donation.
Yeah, okay. Meanwhile, of course, the UK government expected to ban Huawei from 5G mobile networks here. How do you think that decision is likely to be received? Because, you know, already quite ominous comments from the Chinese side on it.
Well, the UK and China have been having increasing tensions over the last couple of weeks. Certainly, this one, the UK is going to look at doing a sort of two-step decision, according to a person familiar. Step one is that British phone companies won't be able to add any new Huawei components to their 5G networks by the end of the year. And then step two is that after that, all existing equipment made by Huawei would need to be pulled from the 5G infrastructure by 2027. That's quite an escalation now in that two-step plan. Understand that, you know, anything that until 2027 has somewhat of a long lead ramp. So I guess there is some time for that to de-escalate possibly. But this is another move that, you know, the U.S. and others have said for quite a while that Huawei's equipment contains security risks, and the Trump administration tried to get Britain onto that for a while, was unsuccessful, now appears to be getting more successful with that. Huawei is a flagship company for China, and I think that any move to strike at it is a move that strikes at China's opinion of itself.
Yeah. It's certainly seen as a highly significant move, I think. Derek, thanks so much. Bloomberg senior editor Derek Wallbank there, bringing us up to speed on the relations between China and the US and China and the UK. We'll hear the Huawei decision officially later today. This is Bloomberg.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. U.S. banks had only a few weeks' experience with the coronavirus pandemic when they last tried to forecast how bad things would get. Now they're about to reveal the impact of 3 more months of COVID-19. Second quarter results will likely show that trends that took hold earlier in the year, surging provision for loan losses and slumping consumer spending, only intensified. J.P. Morgan Chase, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo open their books this morning. Also today, we'll get a look at the devastation done by the pandemic to the airline industry. Delta is expected to report a huge loss for the second quarter. As concerns about a resurgence of the coronavirus weigh on investors' minds, the focus will be on what management has to say about travel demand and about when a recovery will take place. Stocks are staggering up to the starting line this morning after new pandemic fears wiped out a solid gain yesterday. Only the Dow managed a minuscule gain of 11 points. Larry Kofsky, Bloomberg Radio.
If trying to figure out the future of your business is keeping you up at night,
are you seeing it come back at all?
At least you have company.
What do you make of the most recent virus headlines?
How should labor respond?
You're hoping to get political pressure?
Experts, information, breaking news, all day, all night, everywhere.
Do you expect the euro to continue to strengthen? Why even have this hearing?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Office sanitation is more important now than ever. Disinfectants alone won't do the job because they only work per application, exposing surfaces to recontamination. BioShield Matrix is a surface coating with an antimicrobial additive that continuously kills coronavirus and harmful pathogens to create a safe work environment. BioShield Matrix is non-toxic, easy to use, and will not stain or bleach your surfaces. One application for 90 days of proven protection. Do you have the Matrix? BioShieldMatrix.com.
Imagine being... Millions of people in the UK struggle to put food on the table. That's why Asda's donated £23 million to FareShare and the Trussell Trust since 2018. Please help us do more by donating to our Fight Hunger trolleys in store. Asda, we're all in this together. FareShare and the Trussell Trust are registered charities. See asda.com/fight hunger.
Here's to you that learned with homeschooling that your kids are smarter than you. Here's to all the self-taught banana bread bakers. And to you that rocked that very questionable homemade haircut. Costa is giving £3 to everyone that missed us as much as we missed you. Get your £3 in the Costa app today and enjoy a coffee, cake, or snack on us. Come on, you earned it. Terms and conditions apply. For details, visit costa.co.uk/terms.
Listening has always taught us a lot at Honda. And lately, we've been listening to your thumbs. Because thumbs can do everything now. The world is at their thumb tips. So now, the My Honda Plus app lets the thumb take control of your car too. Even when you're not inside the new Honda E, your thumb can find where you parked, set the temperature before you get in, check how much the battery is charged, and schedule charging for when electricity is cheapest. The new Honda E and My Honda Plus app. Oh, a thumbs up. Honda, the power of dreams.
What have you missed the most? A haircut? A visit to the shops?
Oh, you look lovely in that.
What about a nice lunch?
Fish and chips, please.
Salt and vinegar with that.
Or an afternoon in a pub garden? Fancy a casual bike ride? Or perhaps something a little more intense? Or maybe you want a relaxing day out. Whatever you've missed, get out there and enjoy it again safely. Find out how at gov.uk/enjoy summer safely.
Whoa, just got a Moonpig reminder that it's your birthday Saturday.
Yeah, I set that up.
Oh, do you know what? I forget one time. Okay, I'm in the app.
Oh, the romantic card section.
I'm full of surprises. Now, what rhymes with babe?
How about just uploading a nice pic? No, wait, I'm not ready.
Hey, I love you from every angle. Now for the gifts. Oh, and flowers.
Heartfelt can happen anywhere with moonpig.com. Download the app now.
You know, while we're playing these ads, you could open Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram and follow @TuneIn to learn about the best stuff to listen to around the app. Or you could just sit there and listen to these ads.
Get social.
Get social.
Broadcasting live to London on DAB digital radio, to New York, Bloomberg 1130, to Washington DC, Bloomberg 99.1, to Boston, Bloomberg 106.1, to San Francisco, Bloomberg 960, and around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
And it's 8:30 a.m. here in London. A very good morning. I'm Caroline Hebke.
And I'm Roger Hearing, and you're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
So, European equities firmly in the red this morning, down by 1.24%. In terms of the biggest losers, technology stocks dropping 2.7% this morning. So the risk-off mood that we saw in Asia continues here in Europe. That was partly triggered by the growing tensions between the US and China, but also by Singapore slumping into that deep recession after a very, very strict lockdown. As for other markets, FTSE 100 down 0.8%. Xetra DAX down by 1.5% this morning. The bond markets for you this morning trading for German Bund yields at 43 basis points, so just edging down 1.5 basis points for yields ahead of the ECB meeting this week. Also, Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is stronger at 1/10%. The pound actually weaker 1/4% on the spot now, so cable 125.22 at the minute. The euro trades at 113.33. We also see 1.7% decline for Brent crude futures, $41.98, and gold also weaker at 1/10%. So those are the markets now.
Right, let's move on to some of today's top stories now. That Britain is poised to ban the China tech giant Huawei from its next generation of mobile phone networks under a two-step plan to protect critical systems from security threats. According to a person familiar, UK phone companies will not be able to add any new Huawei components to their 5G networks by the end of the year. And all existing Huawei equipment would need to be removed from 5G infrastructure by 2027. The proposal is due to be presented in Parliament today. And according to the China expert Kerry Brown, the issue will hurt the UK's relationship with Beijing.
So you have a very, very big potential clash, and I think this Huawei issue is one of many other issues that's going to hit us and others, middle powers, as we see the face-off between the two big players, the United States and China.
That was Kerry Brown, Professor of Chinese Studies at King's College London and Director of the Lao China Institute.
Meanwhile, I mentioned that the tensions are also on the rise between China and the US. The Trump administration has now rejected Beijing's expansive claims in the South China Sea. The move reverses a previous policy of not taking sides in territorial disputes in the region. In the past, the US has called for protecting freedom of navigation in the contested waterway while stopping short of actually taking a position on specific territorial claims. So this significant move by the US.
Back to the virus pandemic, and face masks are to be made compulsory in shops in England from July the 24th. The move comes after pressure from the opposition, unions and business groups who accuse the government of lacking clarity in their guidance for defeating the pandemic. England made masks compulsory on public transport last month, but it left shoppers with a choice. The police will now be able to fine those who don't comply up to £100.
Meanwhile, when it comes to data, the UK economy grew at a slower than expected pace in May. That's even as the government did ease some of the coronavirus lockdown restrictions. So gross domestic product rose by 1.8% from April, when it plunged by a record 20.3%. But that is lower than the 5.5% forecast for the month, and it left output down by 19.1% in the latest 3 months of the rolling 3-month average.
Right, let's get the latest now in global news with Leanne Gerrans. Leanne, good morning, and you're beginning with a warning from the WHO.
Yes, indeed, Roger. Good morning and thank you. The World Health Organization says COVID-19 probably won't disappear in the coming months, and it's unrealistic to expect that a perfect vaccine will become available to everyone immediately. In the US, California has declared a sweeping rollback of newly reopened businesses, closing restaurants, bars and cinemas. Meanwhile, Japan's government is also warning a new state of emergency is possible if infections continue increasing. Hong Kong has unveiled a raft of antivirus measures, including a fine of hundreds of dollars for anyone refusing to wear a mask on public transport. Bloomberg's Karen Lee says this comes as a financial hub grapples with a new wave of infections.
At an evening press conference Monday, Chief Executive Carrie Lam also said gyms and bars would need to close for a week and restored strict limits on public gatherings. The city's vibrant restaurant scene will also feel the impact, with eateries allowed to offer only takeout from 6 p.m. to 5 a.m. The new measures go into effect on Wednesday. In Hong Kong, Karen Lee, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Now to Europe, and French President Emmanuel Macron will address a nation today in an effort to reboot his presidency. This follows criticism of how his government has handled the coronavirus crisis. Macron will unveil what he has called a new path and is expected to give more clues on a fresh stimulus plan that should be unveiled in late August. And the fallout from Italy's Genoa bridge collapse 2 years ago continues for Atlantia's Autostrade. Bloomberg's John Verlaine has a story ahead of a key Italian cabinet meeting.
Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte is yielding to pressure from his populist coalition partner in a tussle with the Benetton-owned Autostrade per l'Italia over highway concessions. The Premier has rejected a final offer from the Benettons in a dispute that has split his government over the deadly 2018 collapse of a Genoa bridge operated by toll road manager Autostrade, owned by Atlantia. A cabinet meeting is expected on Tuesday to strip Autostrade of the concessions. In Rome, John Verlaine, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Roger.
Leanne, thanks very much for that. Now, it's US bank earnings kicking off earnings season as JP Morgan, Citigroup and Wells Fargo gave their earnings today. Investors largely expecting lousy results, has to be said, but there may be a few positives amid the loan loss doom. For more, let's bring in Bloomberg's Danny Berger. So, Danny, good morning to you. Now, what lenders could come out a winner in this earnings season?
It might be, Roger, that the big investment banks emerge as really the big winners this season. It's going to be the second quarter in a row that was really hurt badly by credit. This we know that's caked into the pie here, as well as better trading revenue results, too. So you have a lot that's already been assumed. So the one last potential for a surprise to the upside really seems to be investment banking. RBC analysts, for example, say that JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, they're really the standouts among the big banks in this regard, that investment banking will be greater than market expectations, and they recommend buying JP Morgan and Morgan Stanley in anticipation of them outperforming. JP Morgan, of course, having their results today. And the benefits here are twofold. In one hand, that might be able to reverse some of the negative mark-to-market effects that you have on loan portfolios and then some of the PE investments as well. But for these banks that have very large capital gains, it gives them more flexibility. So if they're expecting big charge-offs later this year, they can go ahead and boost loan loss reserves now rather than having having to wait for the worst case scenario and building a reserve later down on the road, because they have that ability to do so now with these better iBanking results.
Yeah, okay. So then what is actually the street currently pricing into these banks ahead actually of the earnings? What's the view?
Yeah, besides these bright spots, the expectations are quite weak. We saw this yesterday ahead of the first results today. The KBW Bank Index fell more than 3%. It's currently trading at its lowest since the end of May. Wells Fargo, they report today, they had some of the worst slumps yesterday, falling 4%. And the results might be all over the place. So certainly the street is gearing up for a lot of this volatility, a lot of this uncertainty. We can look at options and say, okay, what are investors protecting themselves against in terms of moves? And so on an absolute basis, investors are expecting the banks today to move somewhere between 6 and 9%. Typically, these banks move around 2%. Again, this is positive or negative after their earnings days. So certainly more volatility expected than your typical quarterly results.
So, Danny, what about the European perspective on this? We're expecting European bank earnings. Are they going to be different from US this quarter?
Well, one of the things that has been different that we saw last quarter that I think is particularly illuminating is we have this big focus on loan loss provisions, amounts set aside for soured loans. The biggest U.S. banks set aside about $25 billion last quarter, and Europe set aside just $11 billion of their 5 largest banks. And this is something we probably can expect again this quarter. Some of the difference there reflects different accounting rules, but we saw a similar thing happen in 2008 as well. The ECB really encouraged lenders to go easy on taking some of these provisions for soured loans. We're seeing that again. And of course, the fear is that European banks, when they emerge from this crisis, will have a similar scenario to 2008, where Europe was saddled with many more soured loans than the U.S. was. Non-performing loans in Europe were 10 times the U.S. level. So we're starting to see this divergence emerge again. If it continues this quarter, it's definitely something to keep our eye on in terms of how will these banks recover, how will they help the greater economy recover. And I think building those reserves against losses, recognizing those losses early on, can be a pretty important tool with ensuring that sort of recovery.
Danny, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Bloomberg's Danny Berger there with an update on what to expect from US bank earnings, JP Morgan, Citigroup, Wells Fargo. But breaking news on the Bloomberg terminal, Roger.
Yeah, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian says they're going to impose sanctions on Lockheed Martin. So this is China striking back, what they call wolf warrior tactics, I think is the phrase, in terms of the way in which China is responding to what it sees as attacks on itself. We'll get you more on that. This is Bloomberg.
To protect her home and family in a disaster, Karen was willing to wade through water, mud, and insurance paperwork.
Yeah, I can do this.
You go, Karen! By simply understanding and updating what her insurance covers and doesn't cover now, she'll be better prepared no matter when disaster strikes. Learn other simple ways to protect your home and family before a natural disaster at ready.gov. That's ready.gov. A message from FEMA and the Ad Council.
Today, nearly all business is international business. The same goes for business disputes. That's why the International Center for Dispute Resolution provides a faster, more efficient approach to dispute resolution across borders. Backed by the American Arbitration Association, the ICDR is the world's leading provider of dispute resolution services. Find out why global expertise matters. Visit ICDR.org.
I've always wanted to learn another language, but every time I try, it never sticks. So I decided to give Babbel a try, and I really like the teaching method of the app. I started with the beginner lesson on Babbel, and it starts with simple words and phrases, and soon you're putting those words into a conversation. Each lesson takes about 10 to 15 minutes, and they're all really different, which keeps things interesting. The app is really smart. It actually keeps track of the words I'm struggling with so I can practice them and get better. I chose Babbel because it was created by real language teachers. They built it around real life, how people actually communicate, and what they care about. I can't wait to use my new language skills in the real world. Dos cervezas, por favor.
With Babbel, get conversational in Spanish, French, German, and more. It just takes 10 to 15 minutes a day. Now try Babbel free. Just go to Babbel.com and start learning a new language today. That's Babbel.com. Babbel.com.
NJIT, New Jersey.
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Tuesday morning by the scruff of the neck. Ignore this gloomy weather and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
Here's to you that learned with homeschooling that your kids are smarter than you. Here's to all the self-taught banana bread bakers. And to you that rocked that very questionable homemade haircut. Costa is giving £3 to everyone that missed us as much as we missed you. Get your £3 in the Costa app today and enjoy a coffee, cake, or snack on us. Go on, you earned it. Terms and conditions apply. For details, visit costa.co.uk/terms.
Eurotunnel Le Shuttle is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car, comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, a safer way to France and beyond.
What would the world be like if we listened more? At Honda, our ears are always open to new ideas. Oh, there's one now, knocking on our eardrum. What's that? What if we made a car with cameras instead of wing mirrors? A robot mower that knows when it's time to cut the grass? A self-balancing motorcycle? And what if by 2022, all of our mainstream cars were hybrid or electric? Great idea. Thanks, ears. Honda, the power of dreams.
London. Toolstation are here to help get your job safely started and finished, with over 60 branches within the M25. All open with social distancing and contactless click and collect from 5 minutes. And with 20,000 top trade quality products to choose from. Order online now for collection in London branches and get £5 off when you spend over £30 with the code LON530. So, get your job started at toolstation.com. Terms and conditions apply.
Short on time? Don't worry. You can still get your cook on with Asda. Get 3 Asda ready meals for just £5.50. Like our beef lasagna or our tomato and mozzarella panette bake. Hang up your oven gloves. We've got dinner covered. Asda. Save money, live better. Selected stores and lines subject to availability. Meals 400 grams, £2.10 each.
As we open things up again, how do we keep safe? Max runs a cafe.
We've worked really hard to make the coffee shop COVID safe. Keep 2 metres apart, or 1 metre with extra precautions. Follow our new one-way system. Use the extra hand sanitizer, and try to stay at your table as much as possible. We can't wait to welcome everyone back. But please, remember the safety guidelines so we can all stay open.
Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
Whoa, just got a Moonpig reminder that it's your birthday Saturday.
Yeah, I set that up.
Oh, do you know what? I forget one time. Okay, I'm in the app.
Oh, the romantic card section.
I'm full of surprises. Now, what rhymes with babe?
How about just uploading a nice pic? No, wait, I'm not ready.
Hey, I love you from every angle. Now for the gifts. Oh, and flowers.
Heartfelt can happen anywhere with moonpig.com. Download the app now.
Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Good morning, I'm Sandra Kilhoff with this Bloomberg Business Flash, and we are seeing red across the screen for European markets this morning, with the CAC 40 leading declines, currently down 2% in Paris, the DAX lower by 1.7%, the Stock 600 sliding 1.6%, and the FTSE down 1%. US futures fairly flat, and it follows a down day in Asia amid fresh US-China tensions. Just in the last 15 minutes, China has announced sanctions on the US defense firm Lockheed Martin. This after Washington rejected China's claims in the South China Sea, and that is what's prompting this risk-off sentiment in the markets. That in turn is boosting the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up 0.2% at the moment. The yen holding at 107.3, sterling a bit weaker on that dollar strength, currently at 125, the euro at 113 this morning. The Korean won down 0.4%. This in particular after South Korea doubled its spending plan to recover from the coronavirus. We're seeing general weakness in the yuan as well as several other currencies, of course, because of that dollar strength. 10-year Treasury yields, meanwhile, turning lower now after earlier gains, currently at 61 basis points for the 10-year Treasury yield. We're seeing 10-year bund yields down 2 basis points at negative 44, 10-year gilt yields sliding to 15 basis points. Over in the commodity markets, we are seeing gold trading at $1,799 a troy ounce, while WTI is down 2% at $39 a barrel, ahead of that OPEC Plus meeting where the group may taper historic production cuts. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Leanne Gerrans with more on what's going on around the world.
Sandra, thank you. Face masks are to be made compulsory in shops in England from July the 24th. The move comes after pressure from the opposition unions and business groups who've accused the government of lacking clarity in its guidance for defeating the pandemic. England made face coverings compulsory on public transport last month, but left them optional for shoppers. The Trump administration has rejected Beijing's claims to large parts of the South China Sea, reversing Washington's previous policy of not taking sides in territorial disputes in the area. The US has genuinely called only for freedom of navigation in the waterway, while stopping short of taking a position. However, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo now says China's claims are unlawful. And one of the world's busiest border crossings is slowly reopening, months after it was closed due to the coronavirus crisis. Singapore and Malaysia will implement a travel green lane across their border, which some 300,000 people use to travel through daily. Officials are aiming to start the program in August to boost travel and essential business. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Roger.
Thanks very much indeed, Leanne Gerrans there with the latest in global news. Now, a risk-off tone is dominating markets this morning amid fresh US-China tensions and, of course, another World Health Organization warning that the virus pandemic will linger. And this comes as total cases are now over 13 million and lockdowns return across global hotspots. According to our next guest, the pandemic, however, will go down as the worst recession ever, but could technically also be the shortest. Well, let's bring in Trevor Greetham, who's head of multi-asset at Laurel London Asset Management. Trevor, welcome to the programme. Good morning to you. Now, just give us a sense of why you think this will be the shortest recession. Now, you're obviously seeing a recovery perhaps faster than many people expect.
Yeah, I think it's a really unusual recession. So technically, it was a very steep, very sudden recession, deepest we've certainly seen in our lifetimes. The mechanical reopening phase has been particularly evident in the US, where people just go back to business in the same way that they do every Monday morning after a weekend off. That's resulted in some extraordinarily strong growth numbers. So technically, a recession being either a sharp rise in unemployment or 2 quarters of negative growth, depending on how you look at it. We've had a recession on the US definition based on rising unemployment, and then a couple of months later, unemployment rates have plunged again in America and the recession's over. But it's not really over, is it? And what we're doing in our strategy is assuming that what we're seeing isn't so much a V-shaped recovery as a square root symbol shaped recovery, where it starts off looking like it's going up very vertically, and then suddenly it flattens off. And that's what we're starting to see in some of the higher frequency data in America, that as the case numbers have picked up again, we haven't got back to where we were in January. We've got back to maybe 3/4 of where we were in January, and now we're flattening off. And that will feel like a recession, even though technically growth turned positive.
So practically, Trevor, what does that mean for you? And also, how does that colour your thinking when it comes to what's happening in Europe? Because the reason that that's partly happening in the US is because the reopening has had to be reversed and the coronavirus remains on the rampage in the US. Not the case in Europe, but there is still the worry of a big second wave.
Yeah, so just reminds everybody, I think, that there's two-way risk. So obviously in March, we had this sort of stock market crash that was the fastest and deepest since 1929. And we've had this very sharp recovery in share prices, but now they don't know which way to go. So you've got a bit of a tug of war between the worsening virus situation, particularly in the US, which is resulting in consumers voluntarily locking themselves down again here and there, and the tremendous amount of policy ease that we're seeing at the same time. It's very hard for markets to rally because they're worried about the virus. It's very hard for markets to sell off very much because they're worried, the bears are worried about policy kicking in and extra stimulus coming through. So it's a very finely balanced situation, and we think it could break either direction.
Well, let me pick up on that, Trevor, because we've heard from Robert Kaplan, the Dallas Fed chief, saying they may be forced to take more action because of the chilling effect of rising infections in the US. But there is an awful lot of support out there, as we mentioned. Is the support going to be enough to prevent a liquidity problem from turning into a solvency problem, do you think?
Well, that's very, very difficult, isn't it? I mean, the aim with monetary policy is to stop a liquidity problem creating an unnecessary solvency problem. And you could argue that's been done in spades. You know, the $1 trillion earmarked in particular for the US investment-grade credit markets is absolutely mind-boggling. So I would argue that in 2008, the banks were too big to fail. And in 2020, it was the bloated investment-grade credit market in America in particular that was too big to fail. And that's where the bailout's been focused. So the central bank very much prevented that liquidity crisis, creating a solvency crisis. But you've got the real economy to deal with, and the real economy is not getting back to normal. And if there is a second surge and a second lockdown, then governments are going to have to take on more and more of this debt. Otherwise, it ends up being a solvency problem. So we're coming back to really a question about policy now. Do we get to a point where governments step back and say, look, we can't take on any more debt, and as a result, a real solvency problem comes through? Or will governments treat this as a war on COVID in the way they might let government debt rack up in a military conflict and just deal with it later? And at the moment, I think the jury's out on that. If there's any sense of rolling back of stimulus, I think stock markets will take it very badly. But my hunch at the moment is governments are still ready to step back in if they need to.
Yeah, interesting. Interesting in terms of what that might mean for Rishi Sunak. We keep a close eye on the UK Chancellor. And you are a UK-based investment management business. So I wonder what your view is on the rising tensions around China, between the US and China, but also the UK and China. Does it have an impact on your investing, on your thinking? Does it have a practical impact on where you put your money?
Well, it doesn't help. And one thing that's happening, the rising geopolitical tensions, which we were expecting heading towards the November US presidential election, irrespective of COVID, they do make you think that volatility will remain high, and that results in potential big swings in either direction. And while volatility has come down from the levels we saw in the first quarter of the year, it's still unusually high. And that's not just because of COVID, it's also because of the geopolitical tensions that are beginning to build up. And it does feel a little bit like those tensions with China are being almost manufactured by governments that want to distract from what's going on at home.
Well, Trevor, one of the things going on at home here, where you're based, of course, is the end of the Brexit interim period, the move for Britain into its new environment, the other side of the end of this year, and still no real evidence that there's going to be a deal, and a certain amount of concern that the people and businesses are not preparing fast enough, and what the economic effect is going to be on, which is obviously a clearly damaged economy, as you've heard from the data this morning here in Britain. What's your take on that?
Well, I met a Taiwan-based global strategist about a month ago, and he said he wasn't sure whether Brexit would be additive to the COVID crisis or multiplicative. And what he meant by that was what you really need to have to happen right now in order to recover from COVID is companies to start getting the confidence to invest and to hire. And if you throw into that mix, get ready for Brexit, but we don't know what Brexit is. Still, we don't know what Brexit is. Get ready for it. You're going to find people will be putting investment and hiring decisions on hold. So I think the UK is definitely suffering, and the UK market shows this. It's been one of the worst performers globally. We've been underweight in our funds. It's heavily exposed to resource sectors that have done quite badly as opposed to tech in America that's done well. And the Brexit risk is just floating around as well. I think you might find that come through in sterling volatility later on, but for now sterling's quite evenly poised.
Yeah, it is. Thank you so much, Trevor Greetham, for joining us, ahead of multi-asset at Royal London Asset Management. This, as we wrap up this hour, Roger, and China is to impose sanctions on Lockheed Martin. So we're getting more details of that this morning. We'll bring you more in the next hour of Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Who's in your corner? When your tenants have an overflowing block sink and you've got a busy day ahead, superheroes crashing through the wall isn't going to help anyone. With Direct Line Landlord Emergency added to your policy, we're on it to send a rather super drainage engineer in 4 hours before you've tucked into your lunch. We can also assemble plumbers, locksmiths, glaziers and electricians. Search Direct Line Landlord Emergency. We're on it. Direct Line. Residential properties. Optional add-on up to 1,500 per call-out. Extreme weather conditions may extend response time. Underwritten by UK Insurance Limited.
Eurotunnel Le Shuttle is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car, comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel, Le Shuttle, a safer way to France and beyond.
Honda. We're not a car company. We're more of a listening company. And now our ears have brought our attention to where people feel most comfortable, the lounge. So we asked ourselves, what could Honda do to innovate in this space? Well, how about more space? Calm and uncluttered, with modern yet retro styling, and built-in screens compatible with your games console. It's the most comfortable lounge you've ever driven. Introducing the new Honda E, our small electric city car. Honda, the power of dreams.
Hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is Bloomberg Radio.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
The idea is to really hold the economy in suspended animation until we get control of this virus.
We are very much in a picture of monetary dominance.
We will get slower growth. I mean, let's not get confused about that.
We are in a national crisis. I think it is for all parties to pull together.
The euro area is facing an economic contraction of a magnitude and speed that are unprecedented in peacetime.
Bloomberg Daybreak Europe on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning from London. I'm Anna Edwards.
And I'm Caroline Hebger in for Matt Miller this week. Good morning. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe live on London DAB Digital Radio.
Yes, you are. And Caroline, we had, we were always expecting European equity markets to open in negative territory, weren't we? But then we got some further ratcheting up of geopolitical tensions between the US and China, and we've weakened further.
Yeah, exactly. We're down 1.6% right now on the US Stoxx 600. I think it's really interesting that China has imposed sanctions on Lockheed Martin, obviously the major US defense company. But it's actually because, according to the Chinese, of a possible deal for Taiwan to buy parts to refurbish defense missiles built by the company. But what one can definitely say is that the back and forth, the ping pong of diplomatic tit for tat is speeding up between the US and China.
Because when I saw those headlines, I was initially wondering, well, how much does Lockheed Martin, big US defense player, how much does it really sell to the Chinese? And actually, Asia-Pacific as a whole is less than 10% of the company's revenue. But firstly, that's to miss the point, because you can use sanctions as a sort of tool of foreign policy these days, it would seem. So maybe that's where the story really lies. Let me get into the data then. Caroline, you rightly point out we're down by 1.6% on the Stoxx 600. The FTSE 100 outperformed outperforms a little for what it's worth, but it's still down by 0.9%. The CAC 40 and the Xetra DAX both down by more than 1.7%. So we get a little more weakness coming through there. US futures have been kind of volatile through the Asian session, haven't they? We've had them up quite strongly around an hour and a half ago, but now they are fairly flat, actually. The Asian session was negative. Really, the negativity was picking up on what happened at the end of the US trading day yesterday. That weighed on stocks stateside, and it was all to do with geopolitical tensions around the South China Sea, the US taking a stance on that in a way that maybe they haven't in the past. That was part of it. Also, virus infections in California and the lockdown measures having to be reintroduced there. All of that very much at the forefront of investors' minds, and so led to some selling, and we're kind of catching up with that. The US futures do seem to be looking for new direction, looking for a new narrative this morning. Other risk assets also under pressure then. Oil prices down by 1.2% on Brent, 42.21, heading towards an OPEC and Friends meeting that takes place in the middle of this week. We're kind of mixed on the Treasury picture right now. We see some reduced appetite for 10 and 30-year, but increased appetite for 10 and 30-year yields coming down on that particular space. We've actually seen some interesting action in gilt markets. The yield on the 2-year gilt went negative to a record degree and actually turned more negative than Japan. The dollar also showing some signs of this risk aversion we have in markets. So we see some dollar appetite. The dollar index up around 0.1% right now, Caroline.
Yeah, indeed. Well, let's continue our conversation about the markets then this morning. So I mentioned that Beijing has announced these sanctions against the American defense giant Lockheed Martin, but it comes after Washington rejected China's claim to large parts of the South China Sea. Well, for more on this and how to think about this story, let's bring in Kokou Agbubloa, who is Global Head of Economics, Cross-Asset and Quant Research at Société Générale Corporate and Investment Banking. Kokou, thanks for joining us. You actually spent 12 years in China, so I think you're a great person to give us an insight into how these ratcheting up of tensions between the US and China actually affects you as an investor and how you think about where you put your money. What do you make of at least the speed and the severity of the tensions now?
Well, I think it's pretty much unprecedented because it's clearly part of Trump rhetoric to be tough on China, and I suspect there is obviously an presidential election agenda there. And from China's perspective, when you look at its economy, it clearly has rebounded and seen a V-shaped recovery, and it's a lot less reliant on export as it had before. So in terms of bargaining power, things are a lot different than a few decades ago, where China would have a weaker hand. So I think at this stage it's very difficult to predict. But aside from saying, uncertainty will be greater going forward. But that being said, I think both countries understand that they can't go out into a all-out war because the pandemic has weakened the economy, and the U.S. is clearly on a weaker footing. So at this stage, I think it just will be more sort of political bantering, and as we get closer to the election, I think things might get worse before it gets better.
Well, I'm relieved. I was going to say, I'm relieved you said that about the possibility or lack of possibility of all-out war, then, Kokou, between these two powers. Let me ask you, as an investor, though, is it possible to invest around bifurcation? The fact that we seem to be splitting the world in two, because it seems increasingly, if you want to choose to buy Chinese technology, you're going to lose access in some parts of the US. If you want to choose to buy US defense products, you're going to lose some kind of access in China. Bifurcation seems to be everywhere.
Yes, I think that's a great way to put it. And I think war today is really around technology in terms of controlling sort of internet traffic or even uses of devices, etc., when it comes to 4G and 5G. So clearly, I think the UK clearly is a good case in point, whereby you have to make a decision, and a tough decision as to who you partner with. But that being said, with Brexit looming over the UK and its need to find trade partners, it's not going to be an easy decision to make. But I do agree this is clearly a bifurcated world.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting description. Yes, it's sort of war by proxy through technology. Look, it's also a week where we get an ECB decision. Let's talk about things a bit closer to home. ECB decision and then the EU summit at the end of the week on the recovery fund. Does that actually get passed swiftly? Is it already priced into the markets? And Merkel sort of sticking to the idea that it'll be 750 billion euros. Are you a buyer?
Yeah, we think it will be approved. If it's not, then it will be sort of delayed, but eventually will be approved. Because if you look at the size of the fund, 750 billion, 500 billion of which are being actual grants, while it had been compared to the Marshall Plan in 1948, its size is a lot less as percentage of GDP. So it's not going to be as big a burden on sort of the budgets of the member countries. So I sort of expect it to be passed, yes.
You expect it to be passed. And what kind of, is there downside risk for European assets, do you think, Koku, when we get the details of it? Is there a risk it's watered down, or are investors just so excited about the prospects of what this means for burden sharing, maybe, into the future, that it will be seen as a real positive still?
Yeah, I think the latter is where we view this outcome. It's more the signaling effect of the first step towards sort of materialization of that, etc., as opposed to something that will be a game changer when it comes to government finances. Because you have to bear in mind all of the nation or state-specific bailout plans through loan guarantees, and on top of that, you have the PPP plan by the ECB and all the different measures that have been already taken. All of these measures will be more effective in dealing with the sort of the economic consequences of the pandemic than this particular recovery fund. So investors are clearly excited by the signal mechanism and not by its size per se.
Okay. On the UK, 2-year bond yields now less than Japan's for the first time, ballooning national debt and deficit in the UK. Also weaker economic rebound than expected. GDP numbers came out this morning. Your view on the UK, are you universally negative, or is there some upside to come at some point?
Well, I think it's clearly more of a decision tree type situation, because it depends on whether we have a hard Brexit or not, and there is no trade deal with the European Union at the end of the year. But I think the UK, it's likely to be dependent on how the currency reacts, because if the currency is relatively stable, then I don't see much volatility on the gilt side of things. But if we were to see the sterling fall off a cliff against the dollar or the euro, then we could see a situation of imported inflation and higher good and services price inflation, and that could lead to more volatility on the gilt side and credit risk becoming an issue. So I think it all boils down to the currency volatility, and everything sort of intertwined in that respect.
Koku, thanks very much for joining us. Good to speak to you earlier on Bloomberg TV and here on Bloomberg Radio. Koku Agbubloa, Global Head of Economics, Cross-Asset and Quant Research at Societe Generale, Corporate and Investment Banking.
Right, let's get the latest when it comes to the pandemic and global news. Here's Bloomberg's Roger Herring. Hi, Roger.
Hi, Caroline. Yes, as global coronavirus cases pass 13 million, the World Health Organization says COVID-19 probably won't disappear in coming months. The WHO Director General, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, is also warning about confusing government responses.
The only aim of the virus is to find people to infect. Mixed messages from leaders are undermining the most critical ingredient of any response: trust.
Meanwhile, in Australia, Queensland has imposed quarantine on anyone entering the state from hotspots in neighbouring New South Wales. Japan's government's also warning a new state of emergency is possible if infections continue increasing, and California has declared a sweeping rollback of newly reopened businesses, closing restaurants, bars and cinemas. Now to Europe. In France, Emmanuel Macron is preparing to address the nation later today. Bloomberg's Anja Nussbaum says the president will use the Bastille Day celebrations to unveil a new direction for the final 2 years of his term.
Macron is seeking to reboot his presidency following criticisms on how his government handled the coronavirus crisis. Macron is mulling a fresh stimulus plan that should be unveiled at the end of August. Whether Macron speaks about his plans for new tax cuts, boosting youth employment, or investing in public hospitals, it will be a balancing act. In Paris, Anya Nussbaum, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
And the UK is poised to ban Huawei from its next-generation mobile networks, reversing an earlier go-ahead. Bloomberg understands phone companies will not be allowed to add new Huawei components to their 5G networks by the end of the year. All existing equipment supplied by the Chinese firm will have to be removed by 2027. Boris Johnson's expected to set out the plans in Parliament later today. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Roger Hearing. This is Bloomberg. Anna.
Roger, thanks very much for that. Now with this morning's sports news, here's George Alderman with the latest on top places in the Premier League.
Manchester United conceded a 96th-minute equaliser as they missed the chance to go third in the Premier League last night. They remained fifth on goal difference following a 2-2 draw with Southampton at Old Trafford. Wycombe's 133-year wait for a place in the second tier of English football has come to an end. The club will play in the Championship for the first time in their history next season after beating Oxford 2-1 in last night's League One playoff final at Wembley. And there's plenty at stake at the top and bottom of the Championship this evening. Second place West Brom can move a big step closer to promotion to the Premier League with a win over Fulham, who occupy fourth. Cardiff continue their playoff push at home to Derby, while Millwall also have hopes of a top six finish ahead of their game with Blackburn. Luton could climb out of the relegation zone by beating QPR as fellow strugglers Hull go to Wigan. Two sides just outside the bottom three, Middlesbrough and Huddersfield, play away at Reading and Sheffield Wednesday, respectively.
Okay, so that's your sports roundup. Now, still ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, the UK could ban Huawei kit from its 5G network by the end of this year, but stripping out the existing gear could take quite a lot longer, some 7 years. We're going to delve into that story, what it means, not just for the technology, but also the relations between the UK and China. Bloomberg opinion columnist Alex Webb will be joining us. Anna, this, of course, as the markets right now, the US stock 600 down by 1.2%, so that risk-off tone is really here in Europe with the Xetra DAX down even more, 1.3% lower. As we look to the US market open, so the Nasdaq hit a record but then pulled back. Nasdaq futures are up this morning, 0.3%. This is Bloomberg.
Elite advisory firms rely on BNY Mellon's Pershing to meet the needs of their most complex clients. Karen Novak, Chief Operating Officer at Pershing Advisor Solutions, explains how.
At BNY Mellon's Pershing, we bring customized insights and strategies to help you grow your advisory business and stay on the leading edge. We can support the needs of your most sophisticated clients with a full range of investment and wealth management solutions, from access to private banking to consolidated bank and brokerage custody. Learn why so many of the largest advisory firms turn to us for the financial strength and high-touch service that BNY Mellon's Pershing can provide. Are you well positioned to stand out from your competition?
Learn more at Pershing.com or call 800-445-4467. Brokerage custody provided by Pershing LLC and other services provided by Pershing Advisor Solutions LLC. Both members of FINRA and SIPC. Private banking and bank custody provided by BNY Mellon NA. Member FDIC.
You have discovered new ways to connect with family, friends, and coworkers, and that you can do business virtually and productively. Embrace your new perspective. You can't go back to the old ways of doing things entirely. Witham can help your business thrive in this new reality with our innovative business solutions. Remote, secure, collaborative, productive. Welcome to the new normal of business. Visit Witham.com to learn how we can help you adapt and succeed. Witham.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Influential Conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's Emily Chang.
Wells Fargo is the latest company to tell its employees to remove the TikTok app from their work phones. And while TikTok may be considering making changes to distance itself from China, White House advisor Peter Navarro says it won't matter, even if the company is sold to a U.S. buyer. Joining us now to discuss potential cyber threats from TikTok is Kirsten Todd, Managing Director of the Cyber Readiness Institute. So first of all, what do you make of Amazon's, they called it an error last week, sending an email to employees that they would be required to delete the TikTok app, then saying again later in the day that that was in fact incorrect. We'll call it a reversal. What's your take on that?
Well, I think, Emily, there's a lot to be thinking about with this issue. I mean, what I'm hearing from industry and in the national security circles here in D.C. is that the concern and the fear over Chinese companies like TikTok is very much out there. And so we don't know what was going on behind the scenes. It certainly is not, we don't expect that Amazon made an error, but we don't know exactly what happened. I think with Wells Fargo following today with the actual action, we can certainly assume that a lot of companies in the boardrooms and certainly in the conversations that I've had with industry leaders, there's certainly a lot of discussion about what to do about this app, particularly as it pertains to company security.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings.
Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Good morning from London. I'm Anne-Marie Horder of this Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. We're seeing a global sell-off in the equity market this morning. Across Europe, the CAC, the DAX, and the IBEX are all down more than 1% this morning. In Asia, they were on the back foot as well. Those equity markets, the Hang Seng, just closed down more than 1%. But we do see U.S. futures fluctuating a bit. They right now are eking out a gain. S&P 500 mini futures up 0.3%. Investors are digesting the latest earnings reports we had into the start of the season, as well as concerns over a resurgence of coronavirus cases in pockets around the world. On top of that, fresh geopolitical tensions. Last hour, China sanctioned Lockheed Martin. In commodities, copper's one to watch. We're down more than 1% this morning, potentially a barometer on those U.S.-China relations. And WTI crude and Brent both down more than 1%. WTI trading just under $40 a barrel. Tomorrow we have that OPEC plus JMMC meeting where we do potentially see them increasing production, which would make sense as to why oil is on the back foot. And in the bond market today, it's really all about the UK 2-year bond declining to a record low. It is now trading at negative 0.117%. First time in 2 years, those bond yields traded less than Japanese debt. As a Bloomberg Radio Business Flash, and here's Roger Hearing with more what's going on around the world. Good morning, Roger.
Good morning, Anne-Marie. Face masks are to be made compulsory in shops in England from July the 24th. The move comes after pressure from the opposition, unions and business groups who've accused the government of lacking clarity in their guidance for defeating the pandemic. England made face coverings compulsory on public transport last month, but left them optional for shoppers. The Trump administration's rejected Beijing's claims to large parts of the South China Sea. This reverses Washington's previous policy of not taking sides in territorial disputes in the area. The U.S. has generally called only for freedom of navigation in the waterway. But the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, now says China's claims are unlawful. And tensions between Ethiopia and Egypt have increased over a disputed dam project on the Nile's main.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm placing a new order to sell short euro at 113.39.7. So new order placed to sell short at 113.39.7. All right.
Columnist Alex Webb, who's joining us to discuss the UK's decision expected today on the fate of Chinese tech giant Huawei's role in Britain's 5G mobile network. Alex, you write so many pieces about technology and you're so knowledgeable on that issue. I want to know the bottom line. What is the conclusion around the idea of spying or oversight somehow by China via Huawei tech? What is the latest view on that?
Well, I'm sorry to disappoint. We don't necessarily know that Huawei does any spying or facilitates spying by the Chinese state. What we do know is that the UK, well, with sources telling our colleagues in Bloomberg News, the UK is going to ban the purchase of equipment for telecoms networks made by Huawei by the end of this year. And then it's likely to require the likes of BT and Vodafone to strip all Huawei equipment from their networks by 2027. Now, the overhang of all this is the fact that China has a law which says if you're a Chinese company and you are requested to carry out tasks for Chinese state authorities, you have to do it and you're not allowed to tell anyone. So the risk isn't necessarily that they know Huawei is carrying out tasks for China, it's that it possibly could someday.
Right, and Alex, good morning to you. And this also has something to do with the relationship between the US and the UK. Of course, the UK is part of the Five Eyes network, and anything that would put that at risk, that perhaps weighs into the conversation. Although that we are hearing now that the sort of peg, if you like, or the change in circumstance that is allowing the UK government to change its view here versus what it thought in January is to do with US sanctions, isn't it? And the types of equipment that Huawei will be able to get hold of.
Yes, absolutely. So what had happened last year is the US placed a ban on US companies supplying Huawei directly. So a lot of Huawei's gear might take chips from companies like Qualcomm, which is a US maker of semiconductors, and they said you can't do that. So there are lots of alternatives to these US companies they could use. The problem is that those companies, say there's a chip maker in Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company is one of the corporation is one of them. The machines that it uses to make its chips often come from American firms. So earlier this year, the US turned around again and said, in fact, if you make chips using equipment that is made in the US, you can't sell those chips to Huawei. So they extended it further. So that means that Huawei's equipment will not be using the same components that it did before. That also means the equipment might not be quite as good, Huawei's own equipment. And so it's an easier decision, therefore, for the UK to make because, previously a carrier might have been expecting to get a Ferrari. Well, it might now get a Ferrari with sort of a Fiat engine inside.
Okay. So then where does all of this leave the poor consumer or business person in the UK who's hoping to get super fast broadband wherever? Is it going to be more expensive? Is there a real risk of blackouts? I suppose it's hard to know now.
So I should clarify, this isn't to do with broadband. This is also to do with 5G. Broadband networks are fixed networks, and so there might be some Huawei equipment in there, but a lot of that it can be made more easily and supplied by Ericsson, Nokia, Cisco. There are a lot of other complex competitors in that space. The debate here is really about wireless communication and 5G. And frankly, for consumers, 5G there isn't a compelling use case yet. You get fast internet already with 4G. You don't need to download films or any more quickly than you do right now. The issue is really about industrial and enterprise applications. Again, we don't yet quite know what they are, but there is likely to be some killer use for 5G over the next decade and hyper-fast wireless internet. There are companies that have competing products. They're just not quite as good as Huawei's gear. That means there's a huge impetus and urge for Ericsson and Nokia, who are the main rivals in that space, to catch up.
Okay, certainly the politics would be on their side, wouldn't it? Alex, thank you so much. Bloomberg Opinion columnist Alex Webb. You can read more on this and other stories from Bloomberg Opinion at bloomberg.com/opinion and on the terminal by typing OPIN-GO.
Now, straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, the Office for Budget Responsibility publishes its Fiscal Sustainability Annual Report. We will dig into the OBR data next. This is Bloomberg.
With a Bloomberg Business of...
New short open for Euro at 113.39.7. So new position, short position open for Euro.
Upon completion of this review. The principal owner, Dan Schneider, and Ron Rivera, head coach, are working to develop a new name and design approach. It's a stark reversal by Schneider, who for years refused to even entertain the possibility. As recently as 2013, when the franchise was defending its name in court, Schneider said, "We'll never change the name. It's that simple." The Atlanta Braves said in an email to season ticket holders that they will not be changing their nickname. According to ESPN, the MLB team will take a further look at the future of the tomahawk chop. And that is a Bloomberg Business of Sports report. I'm Michael Barr.
Reopening. The reopening rotation has taken place.
How will it happen?
Healthcare is obviously very much in focus.
What's next?
Surely it's better to have an extension.
What if?
So this is going to be industry-wide.
At least there's one question you can have answered. Where to keep up?
We have the latest world and national news.
Right here.
This departed from a policy he had long had.
This is about people that you care about.
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Jenny Liss, Jewish.
Here's to you that learned with homeschooling that your kids are smarter than you. Here's to all the self-taught banana bread bakers. And to you that rock that very questionable homemade haircut. Costa is giving £3 to everyone that missed us as much as we missed you. Get your £3 in the Costa app today and enjoy a coffee, cake, or snack on us. Come on. You earned it. Terms and conditions apply. For details, visit costa.co.uk/terms.
Eurotunnel Le Shuttle is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car, comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel, Le Shuttle, a safer way to France and beyond.
So I often struggled at school. Once, when we had a maths test, I looked around the room and everyone was just doing it. And I couldn't, and I began to cry. But my teacher came over and said, it might look like one big problem, but it's just a handful of small ones, and you can deal with that. I hear her voice in my head for every problem I face to this day.
Teaching. Every lesson shapes a life. You could get £26,000 tax-free to train as a teacher. Subject to eligibility, selected subjects only. Search Get Into Teaching.
And action!
I was offered one.
Cut. That's not on the script.
I was offered one. Get in.
Ladies and gentlemen, I was offered one.
Come, boy. I was offered one.
Don't take our word for it. 9 out of 10 people said they were offered a great value deal with O2. Get yours today, in-store, online, or by phone.
I was offered one too. O2 Retail Exit Survey 309 of 348 agreed with the statement. O2 offered me a great value deal. For full verification, see o2.co.uk/terms.
Honda. We're not a car company. We're more of a listening company. And now our ears have brought our attention to where people feel most comfortable. The lounge. So we asked ourselves, what could Honda do to innovate in this space? Well, how about more space? Calm and uncluttered, with modern yet retro styling, and built-in screens compatible with your games console. It's the most comfortable lounge you've ever driven. Introducing the new Honda E, our small electric city car. Honda. The power of dreams.
Broadcasting live to London on DAB digital radio, to New York, Bloomberg 1130, to Washington DC, Bloomberg 99.1, to Boston, Bloomberg 106.1, to San Francisco, Bloomberg 960, and around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
A very good morning from London. I'm Caroline Hepke. It's 9:30 a.m. Good morning.
Good morning, I'm Anna Edward. It is 9:30 a.m. where Caroline and I are here in London. It is 10:30 if you're in Paris or Berlin. Normally we're with Matt Miller, who, of course, presents this programme alongside me. But, Caroline, nice to have you with me this morning. And let's have a look at where we are on the global stocks picture, because we've certainly been weighed down by concern around the virus and geopolitical tensions.
Yeah, absolutely. US Stock 600 now down by 1.2% this morning. And Xetra DAX dropping even more, 1.4%. A 4/10 of 1% drop for the FTSE 100. This is tensions ratcheted up between the US and China, but also we've had some pretty poor data out. For example, Singapore entering recession, the bounce back here in the UK for last month's GDP figure not as good as expected. So there's a lot weighing on the markets, along with, of course, the continued outbreak, especially in the US. In the bond markets this morning, we trade at 43 basis points for German yields, down by 1.5 basis points. Gilt yields have been tumbling. 15 basis points is where we stand, down by 3 basis points this morning, 62 basis points for US benchmark yields. In the oil market, of course, OPEC Plus meeting this week, we see continued declines there. Brent crude trading at $42.23, so down by 1.1%, and WTI down 1.4% this morning. The pound also takes a hit, weaker 0.3%, 125.10, as the dollar firms up just a little, up 0.1%. So those are the markets right now, with the euro trading also at 113.38, Anna.
That's where we are on the markets. Let's have a look at the economics and focus on the UK for a moment. The Office of Budget Responsibility putting out a report, and the lines from it seem to be dropping as we speak, Caroline. The OBR predicting that the UK economy will shrink more than 10% this year. So this is an update on the forecasts from the OBR. We had some numbers out a little bit earlier on that gave us some insight into the month of May. Output rose 1.8% in May, but economists had been predicting something stronger. Economists on the whole predicted a 5.5% gain in May, and we got something weaker than that. So I was talking to David Page at AXA earlier on, and he was saying, it was going to be difficult to meet their full year forecast as a result of that miss in May. It's nice, though, Caroline, to have a positive reading on GDP for any month since March, so that is the positive. But back to the OBR lines. OBR seeing UK budget deficit widening to between 13 and 21% of GDP. Let's let these lines continue to drop, and as we see them, let's bring into the conversation our colleague Dan Hansen, who is Bloomberg Economics senior UK economist, and is joining us now. Dan, we're just getting these lines then from the OBR, talking about the UK economy shrinking more than 10% this year. How does that fit with your existing assessment and what you saw in the data this morning?
Morning, Anna. Morning, Caroline. So I think that sounds about right to me. So the data this morning was a little bit disappointing, and I think we'll be having to downgrade our 2020 forecast, which was already absolutely dire. We had a minus 9.7% contraction in, and I think it's going to be a little bit more than that now. So the OBR numbers, at least on GDP, sound about right to me. I mean, the broad takeaway from the data this morning was that things just haven't picked up as quickly as we were expecting. There were some bright spots in construction and manufacturing, but it's the services sector that's really didn't do as well as we expected in May. And with social distancing and the like, all those containment measures still in place, it's going to be a real uphill struggle for the economy. And so we're still 25% below pre-crisis peak. There's a long way to go.
Yeah, the UK economy is to shrink 12.4% in 2020. That is the OBR's central scenario. But look, this obviously also has to do with the coronavirus. Deaths have fallen, though, in all regions except for London and East England in terms of the latest numbers for the virus. So, yes, England and Wales sees the fewest COVID deaths in 15 weeks, but it still feels as if consumers and businesses don't have confidence. That's the key struggle, isn't it?
I think so, and that's the really interesting point. So we're seeing these restrictions being lifted, but you're not seeing GDP follow upwards and move upwards as the restrictions are lifted. We obviously saw the big fall as the restrictions came into place. And the reason why we think, at least, the level of GDP isn't rising as quickly as the restrictions are being lifted is because, as you say, consumers are extremely cautious. There are concerns not only about health and the virus and the concerns about a second spike, but there are also the associated concerns about losses of income, loss of employment. And you add those two things together, and it makes it very difficult to see how the UK is going to see a really, really rapid bounce in activity.
Yes, and so then you end up with a sort of strange shape to the recovery where we don't actually recover in the short term at all to pre-virus levels. Interesting that the Chancellor was acknowledging some of the challenges this morning. Then, Dan, he said this morning, today's figures underline the scale of the challenge we face. People are worried about the security of their jobs and incomes. And there does seem to be some talk about whether the Chancellor, in making that £30 billion available last week to the UK economy, maybe there's more to come from him in the autumn as we start to see what damage withdrawing the furlough scheme does to unemployment.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we interpreted at least the statement last week as somewhat of a stopgap. So it was a lot of money, £30 billion, but compared to the £150 billion that he put in place in the period between March and July, it wasn't a huge amount. And I think come the autumn, he's going to be thinking about stimulus. I mean, some of what we're seeing here from the OBR, some of the headlines that are crossing now on the side of the deficit, it'll obviously spark a debate about austerity, but it's really not the time to be thinking about that in our view. He really needs to think about what is the next move on the stimulus front. It's likely the Bank of England's going to do a little bit more as well, but really, given how constrained all central banks are, not just the Bank of England, it's really up to fiscal policy to try and propel the recovery. So come the autumn, we think his budget is going to be much more about stimulus than it is about austerity.
Yeah, that's going to be very interesting. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, UK economist Dan Hanson, who is Bloomberg Economics' senior UK economist, I should say, helping us to break the lines from the Office for Budget Responsibility there this morning. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks very much to Dan for that. Let's get an update on global news flow now. For that, we go to Roger Hearing.
Anna, thanks. The World Health Organization says COVID-19 probably won't disappear in the coming months, and it's unrealistic to expect that a perfect vaccine will become available to everyone immediately. In the US, California has declared a sweeping rollback of newly reopened businesses, closing restaurants, bars and cinemas. Meanwhile, Japan's government's also warning a new state of emergency is possible if infections continue increasing. Hong Kong's unveiled a raft of antivirus measures, including a fine of hundreds of dollars for anyone refusing to wear a mask on public transport. Bloomberg's Karen Lee says this comes as the financial hub grapples with a new wave of infections.
At an evening press conference Monday, Chief Executive Carrie Lam also said gyms and bars would need to close for a week and restored strict limits on public gatherings. The city's vibrant restaurant scene will also feel the impact, with eateries allowed to offer only takeout from 6 p.m. to 5 a.m. The new measures go into effect on Wednesday. In Hong Kong, Karen Lee, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
The French President Emmanuel Macron will address the nation today in an effort to reboot his presidency. This follows criticism of how his government has handled the virus crisis. Macron will unveil what he's called a new path and is expected to give more clues on a fresh stimulus plan that should be unveiled in late August. The fallout from Italy's Genoa bridge collapse in August 2018 continues for Atlantia's Autostrada. Bloomberg's John Folane has the story ahead of a key Italian cabinet meeting.
Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte is yielding to pressure from his populist coalition partner in a tussle with the Benetton-owned Autostrade per l'Italia over highway concessions. The Premier has rejected a final offer from the Benettons in a dispute that has split his government over the deadly 2018 collapse of a Genoa bridge operated by toll road manager Autostrade, owned by Atlantia. A cabinet meeting is expected on Tuesday to strip Autostrade of the concessions. In Rome, John Folane, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Roger Hearing. This is Bloomberg. Caroline.
Thank you so much, Roger, for that update. Now let's get the sports news with the latest on top places in the Premier League. Here's George Alderman.
Manchester United conceded a 96th-minute equaliser as they missed the chance to go third in the Premier League last night. They remain fifth on goal difference following a 2-2 draw with Southampton at Old Trafford. Wickham's 133-year wait for a place in the second tier of English football has come to an end. The club will play in the Championship for the first time in their history next season after beating Oxford 2-1 in last night's League One playoff final at Wembley. And there's plenty at stake at the top and bottom of the Championship this evening. Second place West Brom can move a big step closer to promotion to the Premier League with a win over Fulham, who occupy fourth. Cardiff continue their playoff push at home to Derby, while Millwall also have hopes of a top six finish ahead of their game with Blackburn. Luton could climb out of the relegation zone by beating QPR, as fellow strugglers Hull go to Wigan. Two sides just outside the bottom three, Middlesbrough and Huddersfield, play away at Reading and Sheffield Wednesday, respectively.
Now, coming up next, Jeremy Stretch will be joining us from Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. This is Bloomberg.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma.
At age 30, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, you can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
Take the Bond Challenge. Use the free Interactive Brokers Bond Search tool to search their deep availability of U.S. government securities, 34,000 global corporate bonds, and 850,000 municipals. IBKR passes through the highest of all bids and lowest of all offers received at the electronic venues it accesses. Interactive Brokers does not widen spreads, apply hidden fees, or markup quotes. How many basis points does your current broker keep? Find out at ibkr.com/bonds.
I've always wanted to learn another language, but every time I try, it never sticks. So I decided to give Babbel a try, and I really like the teaching method of the app. I started with the beginner lesson on Babbel, and it starts with simple words and phrases, and soon you're putting those words into a conversation. Each lesson takes about 10 to 15 minutes, and they're all really different, which keeps things interesting. The app is really smart. It actually keeps track of the words I'm struggling with so I can practice them and get better. I chose Babbel because it was created by real language teachers. They built it around real life, how people actually communicate, and what they care about. I can't wait to use my new language skills in the real world. Dos cervezas, por favor.
With Babbel, get conversational in Spanish, French, German, and more. It just takes 10 to 15 minutes a day. Now try Babbel free. Just go to Babbel.com and start learning a new language today. That's Babbel.com. Babbel.com.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute. When your tenants have a burst pipe and you've got a busy day ahead, superheroes crashing through the wall isn't going to help anyone. With Direct Line Landlord Emergency added to your policy, we're on it to send a rather super plumber in 4 hours before you've tucked into your lunch. We can also assemble locksmiths, glaziers, electricians and drainage engineers. Search Direct Line Landlord Emergency. We're on it. Direct Line. Residential properties. Optional add-on up to $1,500 per caller. Extreme weather conditions may extend response time. Underwritten by UK Insurance Limited.
Eurotunnel Le Shuttle is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car, comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, a safer way to France and beyond.
So I often struggled at school. Once, when we had a maths test, I looked around the room and everyone was just doing it. And I couldn't, and I began to cry. But my teacher came over and said, it might look like one big problem, but it's just a handful of small ones, and you can deal with that. I hear her voice in my head for every problem I face to this day.
Teaching. Every lesson shapes a life. You could get £26,000 tax-free to train as a teacher. Subject to eligibility, selected subjects only. Search Get Into Teaching.
London. Toolstation are here to help get your job safely started and finished, with over 60 branches within the M25. All open with social distancing and contactless click and collect from 5 minutes. And with 20,000 top trade quality products to choose from. Order online now for collection in London branches and get £5 off when you spend over £30 with the code LON530. So, get your job started at toolstation.com. Terms and conditions apply.
Listen, that's a dream. Everyone has them, jingling away in the back of our minds. And most of the time, that's where dreams stay. So easy to ignore. Anything can drown them out, and everything does. But at Honda, we listen to our dreams. We get right up close. And on really good days, they become reality. From 2022, Honda's mainstream cars will only be hybrid or electric. Honda, the power of dreams.
This is Mike Golick from ESPN's Golick and Wingo. Every morning, Trey Wingo, my son, and I sit down to discuss all the news, drama, and highlights spinning the sports world that day. And with TuneIn, you can hear us whenever and wherever you go. Just search Golick and Wingo to start listening today.
Times Radio, an exciting new national speech station, is here.
Featuring live news,
analysis, conversation,
and the unequivocal world-beating journalism of The Times.
Join Asma Mir and me, Stig Abel.
I'm John Pienaar. Join me on Times Radio.
Join me, Mariella Frostrup.
I'm Giles Corrin.
Hello, I'm Kathy Newman.
This is Michael Portillo.
Join me, Carol Walker.
I'm Hugo Rifkind. Times Radio is here. Search Times Radio on TuneIn to listen.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg QuickTake. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Good morning from London. I'm Anne-Marie Herder with this Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. We are seeing a retreat in global equities this morning across Europe. The CAC, DAX, and IBEX are all down more than 1%. The FTSE 100 down 0.4%. Over in Asia, we did have Asian equities on the back foot as well. The Hang Seng closing down more than 1%, one of the major indices bearing the biggest burden. While S&P 500 futures are now in the green, up 0.3%. Bit of a positive start we are looking towards there. They did close down yesterday alongside the NASDAQ as well, which closed down more than 2% yesterday. In the commodities market, WTI and Brent are both down more than 1%. WTI trading under $40 a barrel this morning as we wait that OPEC Plus JMMC decision tomorrow, where the group may end up pumping more oil. Copper this morning as well, down more than 1%. In the bond market, it's been all about the UK 2-year yield hitting a record low. Right now, we're trading at negative 0.116% on the 2-year UK gilt yield. First time that bonds yielded less than Japanese debt. A lot going into the market today, whether it's the coronavirus and earnings and also geopolitical tensions to look out for. Just last hour, China sanctioned Lockheed Martin. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash, and here's Roger Hearing with more what's going on around the world. Good morning, Roger.
Good morning, Anne-Marie. The UK is poised to ban Huawei from its next-generation mobile networks, reversing an earlier go-ahead. Bloomberg understands phone companies will not be allowed to add new Huawei components to their 5G networks by the end of the year. All existing equipment supplied by the Chinese firm will have to be removed by 2027. Boris Johnson's expected to set out the plans in Parliament later today. In the US, the likely Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden's calling for the setting of a 100% clean electricity standard for the US by 2035. According to people familiar with the plans, Biden will also commit to investing $2 trillion on clean energy over 4 years. The proposals mark a strengthening of the plan Biden proposed while he was fighting for the nomination. One of the world's busiest border crossings is slowly reopening months after it was closed due to the coronavirus crisis. Singapore and Malaysia will implement a travel green lane across their border, which some 300,000 people go through daily. Officials are aiming to start the program in August to boost travel and essential business. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg QuickTake, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Roger Hearing. This is Bloomberg. Caroline.
Thank you so much, Roger, for that world news update. Anna, coming up next, we've got our colleagues over in the US getting ready for their programme.
Absolutely. So Bloomberg Daybreak from New York is up next. Let's check in with Nathan Hager. Good morning to you, Nathan. What lies ahead? I guess the geopolitical tension between China and the US and the virus in California. Two things that knocked markets late in the session yesterday, still to the forefront.
Yeah, definitely. The news of California rolling back its reopening with the coronavirus outbreak still out of control there does seem to have been what sparked the late-day sell-off that had the S&P down nearly 1% yesterday. This morning, we are seeing a bit of a lift for futures contracts, maybe a bit of dip buying there. We're going to ask Seema Shah of Principal Global Investors, her outlook for investments amidst the pandemic and ongoing trade tensions with China. We are also waiting to hear from 3 of the 6 big banks as earnings season kicks off for the second quarter. We'll get a much better idea of what the corporate profit outlook could be with the pandemic continuing. We're going to preview those results from J.P. Morgan, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo with Bloomberg's Shonali Bosick and Danny Berger joining me and Karen Moscow this morning on Bloomberg Daybreak. Hope you'll join us for it as well. Anna.
Lots ahead then. Thanks very much, Nathan. Bloomberg Daybreak is up next. Or if you're listening on London DAB Digital Radio, you'll hear Bloomberg Surveillance.
Okay, so let's talk a bit about the markets then. Turn our attention to FX. The dollar is enjoying, well, just a little bit of a bid today amid risk aversion in the markets more broadly, investors digesting these fresh US-China tensions. The yuan is also turning weaker, according to our next guest. There is a reason to believe that the Chinese currency could, though, regain ground over the coming months. Joining us now is Jeremy Stretch, who is head of FX strategy at Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. Jeremy, great to have you on the programme. So, look, the yuan extending a decline versus the dollar, but actually, does this just mean that the tension between the US and China, that China pushes even harder for the yuan to become actually more of a global currency because so little trade really is done in the yuan right now?
Well, you're absolutely right. There is little trade done in yuan right now, but I think it's interesting if you look at the IMF COFA foreign exchange reserves. We have seen progressively global foreign exchange reserves denominated in the Chinese currency gradually increasing over time, and I think that is a scenario which will gradually and continue to extend. But of course, it's not going to, the yuan is not going to challenge the hegemony of the US dollar anytime soon. But of course, there is going to be this increasing demand or desire from the Chinese authorities to encourage those that they're trading with, and particularly those where they have the Chinese have a significant competitive advantage or vested interest, to trade more in local currency, and so that is going to add to the impetus for the currency going forward.
Good to speak to you, Jeremy. It's Anna here. Let me ask you about the UK. We see a little weakness in the pound this morning, don't we? 125.21 against the US dollar. I wonder what your assessment is of all of the data we've had out this morning. We had the GDP number that was thankfully positive for May, but lower than some had anticipated. And then we get these OBR figures with their central scenario talking about unemployment getting up to 10.1% next year. How does the pound fare through all of that?
Well, I think one of the first things I'd say is that the pound was remarkably resilient through the course of last week, which perhaps was something of a surprise, and there was not a great deal to really hang your hat on. So in a sense, when we were getting nearer that 200-day moving average shut towards 127, it did look as though it was a good opportunity to start to fade that sterling rally on the basis or on the presumption that the news flow on the macro story was going to be pretty challenging through the course of this week. And so you're absolutely right, the GDP print, yes, it was positive, but that's probably about as far as the good news really goes, because, of course, the rebound was much, much shallower than expected. We know that the OBR are always going to be slightly less pessimistic than some of their worst-case scenarios were suggesting a month or so, or 2 months or so ago, but nevertheless, the news flow remains essentially negative. And when you think about the weakness that we've seen, or the comparative decline in economic activity over the course of the last 3 months, and then transmute that forward into the employment data on Friday, it probably does suggest that economic headwinds are still going to be very, very large, and the UK, I think, is going to be uniquely exposed to the ravages of the crisis. So I think that still leaves sterling beholden to downside risks. So I think we can and should see sterling continuing to retreat against the US dollar in the short term, so looking for a move back through sort of 124 and 3/4. And I think in euro sterling, it's also looking relatively interesting as we break up through the sort of 90, 65, 70 area. And I think that's probably got further to run as well. So I think we are going to see euro sterling also climbing back. So the story for sterling, I think, is one of economic headwinds weighing on the fortunes of the pound.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the UK's suffered somewhat 45,000 deaths from coronavirus, the numbers coming down, but it's still been a very, very tough period. What about the euro, though, Jeremy? I just note that the euro hit a 1-month high against the US dollar yesterday. You mentioned against sterling, but Do you think that there is reason for traders to feel optimistic about the common currency, to think that it could actually strengthen significantly in 2020?
Strengthen, yes. Strengthen significantly, I think, might be a rather more difficult story. So our base case scenario continues to be one where we're anticipating a cheaper dollar, but also at the same time, we do find there are justifications for a gradual appreciation of the euro, but not a rapid one. So, 115, 116 is a reasonable and realistic target over the course of the next 3 to 4 months or so, and it seems to be the case that you're looking at the way that some of the option strategies are playing out. That's increasingly a sort of a consensual view. I think we can and will see some impetus for the euro coming via the approval of the Eurozone budget, but also the approval of the Eurozone Rescue Fund, even if that doesn't necessarily happen at this week's meeting. And I think those that are expecting an immediate approval this week might prove to be a little bit disappointed, but I think we're probably still only a few weeks away from that process being passed through. And I think that, as well as a degree of cautious optimism being displayed by the ECB from Madame Lagarde on Thursday at the upcoming meeting, I think should continue to validate a stronger euro story. But I think it is going to be one which will require patience, and it's going to be more of a grind rather than a sprint. And I think you need to be careful as to how much upside you really price into the single currency.
What's your haven of choice at the moment, Jeremy, should you need one? If we see further tensions geopolitically, is it the dollar? Is it the yen? Where do you go?
I think ultimately, clearly the dollar is always a bastion of safety because of that liquidity element, but I think there is still that sort of discussion about whether we would see a retreat from foreign investment back to domestic markets in Japan. I think that's still probably the preeminent or the primary trade. So I think ultimately we would still expect and anticipate that dollar yen will move lower through the course of this year. We are looking for a sort of a 103, 104 level before the end of the year. So I think that is probably still the most likely scenario, that if we are going to see renewed tensions, then the yen will prove to be a beneficiary. And obviously those risk-related crosses like Aussie yen will be very much at the epicenter of that.
Okay, great to get your views on what you think is of interest in the FX market. Jeremy Stretch, Head of FX Strategy at Canadian Imperial Bank of Canada. Anna, I'll leave you with this note. Macron's approval rating in France drops 2 points to 38%. Of course, Macron is speaking. This is Bastille Days, laying out his new government agenda later on today. This is Bloomberg.
The market is unpredictable.
I can find and fund my car, from a Mini to a Jaguar.
Feel good car buying from findandfundmycar.com is the place where you can find quality used cars from trusted dealers rated by you, and where you can fund your car with finance to fit your budget. It's feel good car buying, all in one place.
Shouldn't be a carry on, choose findandfundmycar.com.
What have you missed the most? A haircut? A visit to the shops?
Oh, you look lovely in that.
What about a nice lunch?
Fish and chips, please.
Salt and vinegar with that.
Or an afternoon in a pub garden? Fancy a casual bike ride? Or perhaps something a little more intense? Or maybe you want a relaxing day out. Whatever you've missed, get out there and enjoy it again safely. Find out how at gov.uk/enjoy summer safely.
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Tuesday morning by the scruff of the neck. Ignore this gloomy weather and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview thought. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
World 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is Bloomberg Radio.
Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios, this is Bloomberg Daybreak for Tuesday, July 14th, 2020. Coming up this hour.
California rolls back reopening measures as infections spike.
Cases in Florida threaten to strain Miami-Dade hospitals beyond capacity.
The debate over classroom learning heats up as big cities defy White House orders.
And Wall Street awaits second quarter results from some of the biggest banks.
New Jersey Transit lifts its 50% capacity limit on trains starting tomorrow, plus President Trump weighs in on his relationship with Dr. Fauci. I'm Michael Barr. More ahead.
I'm John Stashower in sports. A possible hold-up to a new name in Washington, and a big NBA star has tested positive.
That's all straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak. On Bloomberg 1130 New York, Bloomberg 99.1 Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 106.1 Boston, Bloomberg 960 San Francisco, Sirius XM 119, and around the world on BloombergRadio.com and via the Bloomberg Business app.
Good morning, I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Bloomberg Daybreak is brought to you by SEI. Crises bring out the best in people. Character, community, partnership, together as one. SEI. Go to SEIC.com/IMS.
U.S. futures are gaining while stocks in Europe and Asia decline. It is 5:01 on Wall Street, and we check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures up 10 points this morning. Dow futures up 94. NASDAQ futures up 36. The DAX in Germany is down 1.5%. 10-year Treasury down 1/32, yield 0.62%. The yield on the 2-year 0.15%. NYMEX crude oil is down 1.2% or 49 cents at $39.61 a barrel. And COMEX gold is down 0.6% at $1,804 an ounce. Nathan.
Karen, we begin in California, where the state is rolling back reopening measures. Governor Gavin Newsom is responding to rising infections by closing indoor activities.
Restaurants, wineries, tasting rooms, movie theaters, family entertainment centers, zoos and museums, card rooms, and the shuttering of all bars.
The move comes as California reports record hospitalizations. Newsom says more restrictions could come for counties with increased exposure.
COVID-19 is not going away anytime soon until there is a vaccine and or an effective therapy.
California has reported more than 100,000 infections in the past 2 weeks, while hospitalizations have increased 28%.
In Florida, cases continue to rise at a blistering pace. Intensive care patients in Miami-Dade County hit a fresh record. The region currently has no plans for another lockdown, but Miami Mayor Francis Suarez is not taking it off the table.
You can't rule out the possibility of a stay-at-home order, and so, we're analyzing it day in and day out to make a decision. But it's not something that I'm going to rule out at this point.
When it comes to schools, Suarez says there's been no decision on indoor classes, though education officials are feeling pressure from the state.
The education commissioner of the state of Florida has mandated that schools be open, but I'm not sure that our superintendent is in agreement with that, and certainly, not if it poses a risk to our children or to the parents who are teaching.
Miami's mayor says the city's hospital system is strained with little to no capacity left at intensive care units.
Cities and states across the country are grappling with how to teach classes this fall. The White House is pushing for in-person learning, but the second largest district in the country has decided not to return kids to classrooms.
We must prevent gatherings and should only open when it is safe for our students, our staff, our teachers, and our families.
L.A. Mayor Eric Garcetti is moving classes online to start the year. San Diego's doing the same. The move comes in direct opposition to President Trump, who's made reopening schools one of his top priorities.
New York is laying out criteria to resume in-person learning. Governor Andrew Cuomo says regions can restart classes if they meet certain reopening and infection rate metrics.
You're in phase 4, and you're under 5% infection rate. That means the virus is under control.
And that means you can restart classes, but Cuomo is leaving the door open to move learning back online if those metrics don't hold.
Schools will close if the regional infection rate is above 9% on a 7-day average.
Governor Cuomo is criticizing President Trump for pushing states to reopen schools. He says the administration is denying the reality of the situation.
In Maryland, Governor Larry Hogan is also grappling with how to resume classes.
Everybody wants to get kids back to school because it's so important that we get them back learning again.
but we've got to do it in a safe way.
While no decision's been made, Hogan tells us he expects to deploy a combination of virtual and in-class learning this fall.
We're going to come up with a plan that's probably going to be some kind of a hybrid that makes sure that we get our kids educated and back to school, but in a very safe way.
Hogan is also pushing for aid from the federal government, saying Maryland risks losing 4 million jobs without it. On that front, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he'll likely introduce a new stimulus bill as soon as next week.
Turning to markets now, stocks in Asia and Europe are lower. Sentiment in Asia soured overnight as tensions between the U.S. and China ramped up again. The White House is rejecting Beijing's claims in the South China Sea. Here with more on the market moves is Bloomberg's Juliet Sally in Singapore. Juliet, good morning.
Good morning, Karen and Nathan. China's CSI 300 retreated from Monday's levels despite positive June trade data, while the Chinext index saw losses of more than 3% intraday as volatility picks up in China's most overheated stocks. In Hong Kong, stocks fell as more restrictions came in following a tick-up in virus cases. The Nikkei 225 fell 0.9% following Monday's more than 2% gain, while markets were lower in Sydney and slightly weaker in Seoul. In Singapore, Juliet Sali, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Juliet, thanks. Back here in the U.S., investors await earnings from big banks. J.P. Morgan, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo report this morning. And here with more is Bloomberg's Larry Kofsky.
All eyes will be on the bank's defense mechanisms to counter the fallout from the coronavirus pandemic. And loan loss provisions, which surged in the first quarter as pandemic lockdowns took hold, are expected to climb further. Nationwide stay-at-home orders are also expected to have reduced income from service charges and credit card fees, a cornerstone of the bank's growth in recent years. Analysts expect a profit of about $1.04 per share at J.P. Morgan Chase and 38 cents at Citigroup. Wells Fargo is projected to lose about 7 cents. Larry Kofsky, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Larry, thank you. And S&P futures up 9 points this morning. Dow futures up 91 and NASDAQ futures up 31. The euro at 1.1351 against the dollar. The British pound 1.2521 and the yen is at 107.35. And straight ahead, we have the latest world and national news, and this is Bloomberg.
All right, Karen, thank you. It's 5:07 on Wall Street, and Michael Barr has more on what's going on around the world. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Nathan. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy says his state will lift the 50% capacity limit on NJ Transit trains and private carrier buses beginning at 8 p.m. tomorrow. Murphy says more people are now heading back to offices, and the state is still flattening the curve.
We are seeing increases in ridership, which are beginning to approach 50% of the stated maximum capacity of these vehicles, and we want to ensure that people are able to get to their jobs and that the system continues operating as efficiently as possible.
Murphy says face coverings must be worn on trains and at stations. New York City will redouble efforts to educate young people about the importance of wearing masks and keeping socially distant after a rise in cases among those ages 20 to 29. Top infectious disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci linked the surge in U.S. coronavirus cases to the country's failure to shut down completely and then a rush to reopen too soon. Speaking at California's Stanford School of Medicine, Fauci says a full lockdown to get control of the virus in the U.S. isn't necessary.
If we step back, you don't necessarily need to shut down again, but pull back a bit and then proceed in a very prudent way of observing the guidelines of going from step to step.
President Trump says he has a very good relationship with Dr. Fauci, but does not always agree with him. Trump has been increasingly critical of government health officials and their guidance. It was a violent Monday in New York City. At least 17 people were shot, a tally that would be considered high for a weekend day, but officers say that is astronomical for early in the week. The New York Post reports in Brooklyn alone there was a total of 12 victims. A federal judge is demanding more information about President Trump's decision to commute the prison sentence of longtime ally Roger Stone. The president stands by his decision despite some GOP pushback.
I'm getting rave reviews for what I did for Roger Stone, and he frankly is going to go and now appeal his case. He had a jury forewoman who hated Roger Stone.
It is primary day in Alabama. Former Attorney General Jeff Sessions trying to win back his Senate seat, and former Auburn University football coach Tommy Tuberville are running to be the GOP nominee in the Senate race. The winner will go up against current Senator Democrat Doug Jones in the fall. Global news, 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
All right, Michael, thanks. Coming up to 5:10 on Wall Street. Time for the Burden Accountants and Advisors Sports Report. Good morning, John Stashower.
All right, good morning, Nathan. The NBA has to be thrilled that of 322 COVID tests that took place in Orlando, only 2 came back positive, although one of the NBA's biggest stars has the virus. Houston's Russell Westbrook. It's not known if that was one of the 2 or if it came from a previous test. Meanwhile, Indiana's best player, Victor Oladipo, who was going to opt out for injury reasons, has changed his mind and expects to play. The NBA, NHL, and MLB have all had players opt out from playing. None will get paid, but all got the blessing of their league. Not the case in the WNBA, where Elena Delle Donne is the MVP. Last year led Washington to the championship. She says she was advised by her doctor not to play because of Lyme disease. The league says that's not a valid reason and is forcing her to play. The Washington NFL team, the team with no name. It's not Redskins anymore. The new name may be held up because of a man who lives in Arlington, Virginia, who just 9 days ago received trademarks on 8 nicknames that the team was considering changing to. It's not known if his motivation was to try and force the team to keep Redskins or to get paid in return for relinquishing the trademark. Speaking of getting paid, the deadline is tomorrow for a player with a franchise tag to sign a multi-year deal. It does not appear as if it will happen for Dak Prescott in Dallas. The Cowboys quarterback set to make $31.4 million this upcoming season. Deshaun Jackson, the Eagles wideout who recently made anti-Semitic posts, spoke with a 94-year-old Holocaust victim, and Jackson now says he plans to visit Auschwitz and donate money to Jewish community efforts. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Nathan.
All right, John, thank you. Ahead of the kickoff of earnings season with 3 of the 6 big banks reporting this morning, futures are on the upswing with S&P futures higher by 7.5 points. Dow futures up 71. NASDAQ futures positive by 22 points. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak.
Why do hedge funds and other alternative managers rely on Pershing for a highly personalized experience? Mark Alderati, a managing director at BNY Mellon's Pershing and head of Prime Services, explains.
In today's fast-paced environment, where the only constants are change and volatility, you need a prime broker who's both steady and agile, focused on supporting your needs so that you can focus on growing your business and producing results. Exceptional client service and advocating for our clients is at the core of what we do. Our award-winning high-touch team is just one of the benefits of working with BNY Mellon. We help alternative investment managers create great experiences for their clients. Whether it's customized financing, securities lending solutions, platform access, or outsourced trading, BNY Mellon's Pershing is a prime broker who's committed to this business and dedicated to meeting your evolving demands.
To learn more about the unique and industry-leading solutions for hedge funds and other alternative managers, visit Pershing.com. Pershing, LLC. Member FINRA, NYSE, SIPC.
I've always wanted to learn another language, but every time I try, it never sticks. So I decided to give Babbel a try, and I really like the teaching method of the app. I started with the beginner lesson on Babbel, and it starts with simple words and phrases, and soon you're putting those words into a conversation. Each lesson takes about 10 to 15 minutes, and they're all really different, which keeps things interesting. The app is really smart. It actually keeps track of the words I'm struggling with so I can practice them and get better. I chose Babbel because it was created by real language teachers. They built it around real life, how people actually communicate, and what they care about. I can't wait to use my new language skills in the real world. Dos cervezas, por favor.
With Babbel, get conversational in Spanish, French, German, and more. It just takes 10 to 15 minutes a day. Now try Babbel free. Just go to Babbel.com and start learning a new language today. That's Babbel.com. Babbel.com.
Debbie Hart is president of...
I can find and fund my car, from a Mini to a Jaguar.
Feel good car buying from findandfundmycar.com is the place where you can find quality used cars from trusted dealers rated by you, and where you can fund your car with finance to fit your budget. It's feel-good car buying, all in one place.
Shouldn't be a carry-on, choose findandfundmycar.com.
How do we control coronavirus now? Listen to Claudia. She's a care worker.
I got the call from NHS Test and Trace. Told I'd been in contact with someone with coronavirus. Couldn't believe it. I had to isolate at home for 14 days. Couldn't go to work, couldn't go to the shops, couldn't get out to exercise. I didn't even feel ill. But you know what? To protect my family, my friends, my community, well, you just do it, don't you?
Stay alert, control the virus, save lives.
Decisions, decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Tuesday morning by the scruff of the neck. Ignore this gloomy weather and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
Here's Emily Chang.
Wells Fargo is the latest company to tell its employees to remove the TikTok app from their work phones. And while TikTok may be considering making changes to distance itself from China, White House advisor Peter Navarro says it won't matter, even if the company is sold to a U.S. buyer. Joining us now to discuss potential cyber threats from TikTok is Kirsten Todd, Managing Director of the Cyber Readiness Institute. So first of all, what do you make of Amazon's, they called it an error last week, sending an email to employees that they would be required to delete the TikTok app, then saying again later in the day that that was in fact incorrect. We'll call it a reversal. What's your take on that?
Well, I think, Emily, there's a lot to be thinking about with this issue. I mean, what I'm hearing from industry and in the national security circles here in D.C. is that the concern and the fear over Chinese companies like TikTok is very much out there. And so we don't know what was going on behind the scenes. It certainly is not, we don't expect that Amazon made an error, but we don't know exactly what happened. I think with Wells Fargo following today with the actual action, we can certainly assume that a lot of companies in the boardrooms and certainly in the conversations that I've had with industry leaders, there's certainly a lot of discussion about what to do about this app, particularly as it pertains to company security.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow. And European stocks are extending a global retreat. German bonds climbing as investors weigh the risks of the upcoming earnings season and economic hit of rising virus cases. U.S. stock index futures, meanwhile, are on the rise. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. Right now, S&P futures are up 13 points. Dow futures up 124. NASDAQ futures up 37. The DAX in Germany is down 1.4%. 10-year Treasury down 230 seconds, yield 0.62%. Yield on the 2-year, 0.15%. NYMEX crude oil is down 1% or 40 cents at $39.69 a barrel. COMEX gold is down 0.6% or $11 at $18.0310 an ounce. The euro, 1.1358 against the dollar. British pound, 1.2522, and the yen at 107.34. Bank earnings this morning. We're watching for J.P. Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, and Citigroup to report, and we're also looking for a report on small business optimism out at 6 o'clock Wall Street time, and the consumer price index out at 8:30. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Michael Barr with more on what's going on around the world. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. It is primary day in Alabama. Former Attorney General Jeff Sessions is trying to win back his old Senate seat. Texas voters are also heading to the polls today for runoff elections. The Trump administration rejected China's expansive maritime claims in the South China Sea, reversing a previous policy of not taking sides in such disputes and escalating tensions with Beijing on yet another front. The move aligns the U.S. with a 2016 ruling by a United Nations tribunal that found China's claims to waters also contested by the Philippines were unlawful. President Trump is seeming to downplay the tension between himself and the nation's top infectious disease expert. After his advisors put out information critical of Dr. Anthony Fauci, President Trump told reporters that he gets along just fine with the government's leading expert on infectious diseases. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by More, the 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
All right, Michael, thanks for coming up to 520 on Wall Street, live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studios. This is Bloomberg Daybreak, and we're joined this morning by Seema Shah, Chief Strategist at Principal Global Investors. Good to have you with us this morning, Seema, as we see a bit of a lift for futures contracts after the late-day sell-off that appeared to be sparked by California announcing its rollback of its reopening. Where do you see equities going from here now that the biggest economy, at least at a state level in the U.S., is starting to pull back now?
Good morning. So I think that with, as you said, with a lot of the reopenings going into reverse, and, you know, we don't see the economy doing particularly well. We think there's been a release of pent-up demand, which has been driving economic activity up till now, and that can certainly carry things. But we're not expecting a continuation of the incredible Q2 performance by any means. But as long as we have central banks standing behind markets, and they very clearly are set to do so, we can't see that there would be a significant correction in the second half of the year. So I think what we're hoping for is just a process of consolidation through to year-end now.
Through to year-end. So just a lot of choppiness from here on out. How do you take advantage of that?
Yeah, it's a very difficult one at the moment. I mean, we believe that, you know, firstly, investors should stay fully invested in this kind of environment. It is difficult, but I think when you have a background where there is a lot of risk and you need to have continued caution, you need to pick out the sectors that are still going to benefit, almost winners from this kind of environment. And to us, although technology is clearly expensive, we think it's got further to run still. So, you know, we know that investors at the moment will be looking for strong balance sheets for positive cash flow. Those are the companies that are going to be able to withstand a lot of the challenges. So we still like technology and generally a more defensive positioning within the portfolio and looking really at high quality.
Of course, we did see a big sell-off on the tech side yesterday. Is there a risk of overvaluation there and potentially a bubble starting to burst?
I mean, I think there is certainly an argument to be had. You know, we do find that there is some concern certainly creeping in from that regard. But I think that, you know, as long as you have a backdrop which is still full of uncertainties, you need to have companies that are strong enough to deal with this kind of environment. So you need to, wherever you're looking, you know, whichever sector it is, it needs to have a strong balance sheet. You need to make sure that the company isn't taking on too much leverage. And it's also in an industry which is essentially going to be enjoying almost a secular growth story. And for us, technology still stands there. The areas that when we would start to have some concerns is if we see a return of over-regulation. So if we have some concerns growing in the U.S. about the regulatory side, that's when we would start to really question technology. But for the time being, we do have, I think, a lot of conviction on that trade.
Are you looking for more certainty on profits as earnings season gets underway here?
Absolutely. You know, with the lack of guidance, I think it's been very, very difficult for analysts to get a good idea about, you know, which companies are going to be doing well. I think, you know, for us, we think about Q2. We know that look, it's going to be a bad quarter, but I think a lot of it has already been priced in, especially for the U.S. I think there's some potential for negative surprises in Europe, maybe less so in Asia Pacific. But we think that, you know, looking on for the rest of the year, we don't think there's that much more room for further downgrades. A lot of it has been baked in.
Do you think that corporates are going to actually give some more clear guidance on their own earnings expectations going forward here? Is there still too much uncertainty on that front?
I think there's still a lot of uncertainty. I think that, you know, we could be a little bit in a better situation than we were last quarter, certainly with the reopenings. It feels like there is at least a vision of where things are going. But I certainly don't expect to return to the kind of levels of guidance that we were experiencing before COVID. You know, ultimately what we've just seen in the last few weeks is as soon as you get a resurgence in any kind of virus cases, and we still, of course, we don't know exactly when that's going to happen, that we should start to anticipate that there will be rolling lockdowns through year-end. And the other thing that we still are very unsure of is, you know, how do consumers behave? You know, do they respond to these kind of lockdowns by just pulling back a lot of their normal behavior? So do they pull back from their shopping behavior, from their general going out and eating out? So these are the things that we still need to watch for over the progress of the year.
And, of course, earnings season gets going in earnest later this morning when 3 of the 6 big banks report their second quarter results. We're going to have full coverage here throughout the morning on Bloomberg Daybreak. Seema Shah, Chief Strategist at Principal Global Investors, thanks so much for your insights this morning. Good to have you with us. At the moment, S&P futures are higher by 11 points. Dow futures up 113. NASDAQ futures a gain of 38 points. European stocks still trending lower with the DAX in Germany down 1.4%. CAC in Paris down 1.5%. 10 years down 2/30 seconds. Yield on a 10-year Treasury 0.62%. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Apple is changing up its operations as COVID-19 cases continue to spike in the U.S. and some parts of the world. The company is pushing retail staff to work remotely as the virus forces Apple to close some of its stores again. It's also shipping COVID-19 test kits to employees' homes and has told staff in a memo that a full return to U.S. offices won't happen before the end of the year. Of Apple's 271 retail locations in the U.S., more than 90 have had to close again because of spikes in the number of COVID-19 cases. Stock futures have been fluctuating this morning after a mostly lower close yesterday. Stocks stumbled in the afternoon on signs the coronavirus was slamming reopening plans in states such as California. Some big banks report earnings today, including J.P. Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, and Citigroup. We also hear from Delta Airlines. And today we're also watching for the report on June consumer prices in the U.S. Gina Cervetti, Bloomberg Radio.
President of the Jewish Communal Fund, Zoya Raines, and her husband, Robert Friedman, Jewish activists and philanthropists, talk about why they chose the Jewish Communal Fund for their charitable giving.
As very busy working parents, we wanted to focus more on the charity part of it and wanted to focus more on our children and less on the administration.
The Jewish Communal Fund is one of the oldest and largest donor-advised funds, but at the same time, they're totally up to date and have state-of-the-art systems for us to access and manage our contributions online. The assets in our fund at the JCF grow tax-free, so we can generate more charitable dollars to support the charities that we care about most.
Let JCF minimize your taxes and maximize your charitable giving.
We're incredibly passionate about our charity, and the JCF allows us to focus more on the charity and less on the administration and the headaches.
For more information about Jewish Communal Fund, visit our website at jcfny.org and request a new fund kit.
Not completing high school is more of a social.
How do we control coronavirus now? This is Scott. He's a nurse.
NHS Test and Trace helps stop the spread of the virus in our communities. If you've got symptoms, even mild ones, get a test immediately. Don't leave home for any other reason. If you test positive, we can trace the people you've been in contact with and contain the virus. So get tested and protect each other.
To get a test, go to nhs.uk/coronavirus or call 119. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Tuesday morning by the scruff of the neck. Ignore this gloomy weather and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
Eurotunnel Le Shuttle is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car, comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, a safer way to France and beyond.
London. Toolstation are here to help get your job safely started and finished, with over 60 branches within the M25. All open with social distancing and contactless click and collect from 5 minutes. And with 20,000 top trade quality products to choose from. Order online now for collection in London branches and get £5 off when you spend over £30 with the code LON530. So, get your job started at toolstation.com. Terms and conditions apply.
Vision Express stores are open again for all your eye care needs.
So you can now book an eye test. And while we look after your eyes, we're looking out for your safety too by following social distancing measures and using personal protective equipment. Find your nearest store and book online at visionexpress.com. We're open for you.
Minions, did you know Sky Broadband Superfast guarantees your speed? No, Stuart, it doesn't guarantee you'll win the game. Or that your video will go viral. Or that you'll match with the love of your life. But Sky Broadband Superfast does guarantee the speed we promised or money back. So reliable, it's minion-proof. Sky, believe in better. Sky Fibre areas only. Speed measured to hub. Must drop below min download speed for 3 consecutive days. 1 month subscription refund. Claim up to twice in min-term after first fortnight. See sky.com.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
It's 5:30 on Wall Street. Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow, and we are just about 4 hours away from the opening of U.S. trading. Let's get you up to date on the news you need to know at this hour. U.S. futures are higher this morning while stocks in Europe and Asia tumble. Virus concerns are weighing on sentiment as California rolls back reopening measures. Governor Gavin Newsom is responding to rising infections by closing indoor activities.
Restaurants, wineries, tasting rooms, movie theaters, family entertainment centers, zoos and museums, card rooms, and the shuttering of all bars.
California is reporting record hospitalizations, and Newsom says more restrictions could come for counties with increased exposure.
In Florida, intensive care patients in Miami-Dade County hit a fresh record. Miami Mayor Francis Suarez says hospitals are nearing max capacity.
Our hospital systems are getting strained. We have a very small capacity in our ICUs.
Miami's mayor says there are currently no plans for another lockdown, but he isn't ruling one out.
Cities and states are grappling with how to teach classes this fall. The White House is pushing for in-person learning, but the second largest district in the country has decided not to return kids to classrooms.
The fall semester will begin with the last one let off, with distance learning. That students will not attend classes in person.
L.A. Mayor Eric Garcetti is starting the year with online classes. San Diego is doing the same. The move comes in direct opposition to President Trump, who's made reopening schools one of his top priorities.
Investors are weighing the impact from the virus, and today they also weigh earnings from U.S. banks. J.P. Morgan, Wells Fargo, and Citigroup report this morning with the pandemic front and center in second quarter results. We get more from Bloomberg's Danny Berger.
It's going to be the second quarter in a row that was really hurt badly by credit. This we know that's caked into the pie here, as well as better trading revenue results, too. So you have a lot that's already been assumed. So the one last potential for a surprise to the upside really seems to be investment banking.
Bloomberg Intelligence expects revenue gains at J.P. Morgan and Citigroup and a decline at Wells Fargo. Loan loss provisions are likely to weigh on results from all three.
Futures this morning are higher. S&P futures up 13 points. Dow futures up 121 and NASDAQ futures up 47. The DAX in Germany's down 1.25%. 10-year Treasury down 2/32, yield 0.62%, and the yield in the 2-year 0.15%. NYMEX crude oil is down 0.8% or 32 cents at $39.78 a barrel, and COMEX gold is down 0.6% or $11.70 at $18.0230 an ounce. Straight ahead, the latest world and national news. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Karen, thank you. It is 5:33 on Wall Street, and now with more on the local response to coronavirus and what else is happening around the world. Here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Nathan. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo says schools will be approved for reopening if their region is in phase 4 and the daily infection rate remains 5% or lower over a 14-day average. The governor says the state will maintain a safety valve after it determines during the first week of August which schools can reopen. Cuomo went on to say if the virus spikes between the first week in August and the day schools open and the regional infection rate over a 7-day average is more than 9%, then the school will close.
We're not going to use our children as a litmus test, and we're not going to put our children in a place where their health is endangered.
Starting today, travelers from certain states landing at New York airports could face a $2,000 fine for failing to fill out a form that state officials would use to track travelers and ensure they're following quarantine restrictions. New Jersey transit trains, buses, and light rail may resume operation with full capacity.
We are lifting the 50% capacity limits currently enforced on NJ Transit and private carrier buses, trains, light rail vehicles, and Access Link vehicles effective 8 p.m. this Wednesday.
Governor Phil Murphy says face coverings will remain required for all staff and passengers. The White House is denying that it's trying to discredit one of their coronavirus task force members, Dr. Anthony Fauci.
I have a very good relationship with Dr. Fauci. I've had for a long time, right from the beginning. I find him to be a very nice person. I don't always agree with him. I closed the border, as you know, to China. I did the ban on China, heavily infected.
President Trump, however, the White House press office actually sent reporters a list of quotes that Fauci has made. The White House said he was just wrong. A tell-all book from President Trump's niece gets released today. The publication follows a judge's rejection of the Trump family's attempt to stop it. Someone vandalized the Black Lives Matter mural painted in front of Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue yesterday, and it was caught all on video. Police are looking for the person who walked up to the mural and dumped red paint over it. Forecasters say New York will likely see temperatures above 90 degrees starting this weekend and continuing into next week. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
All right, Michael, thanks. It is coming up to 5:36 on Wall Street. Time for the Burden Accountants and Advisors Sports Report with John Stashower.
All right, Nathan, Steve Cohen back in the game trying to buy the Mets. He withdrew his $2.6 billion bid due to being forced to wait to gain control. But with those restrictions no longer in place, Cohen has reportedly bid at even $2 billion, although Fox Business reports MLB owners don't want Cohen in their club for fear he would spend so much he would drive up player salaries. And new names have surfaced in the group that includes Alex Rodriguez and Jennifer Lopez. Other investors include former NFL players Joe Thomas and Brian Urlacher, current Chiefs tight end Travis Kelce, even a marginal NBA player, Mason Plumlee. Their bid reportedly $1.7 billion, with A-Rod and J-Lo putting up $300 million. Waiting to hear on the new name for the NFL team in Washington. A man in Arlington, Virginia just got the trademark on 8 names that were being considered, but Redskins is out. Owner Dan Snyder said to be working on a new name with Ron Rivera, Snyder's 9th coach in the last 20 years. He's never coached a game or even a practice in Washington, yet he gets to help decide the new name. Houston Rockets star Russell Westbrook tested positive for the virus. Says he feels well, but he'll go into quarantine. Memorial Golf tees off Thursday in Ohio. It's Tiger Woods' first tournament since February, and he's going to play with Rory McIlroy and Brooks Koepka. The Patriot League, following the lead of the Ivy League, no fall sports. They are letting Army and Navy make their own decision, and the athletic director at Navy says he's hopeful that even if there's no college football season, it can still be an Army-Navy game in December. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Nathan?
All right, John, thank you. It's 5:37 on Wall Street. Time for the Tri-State Business Report with Bloomberg's Ed Corey.
Hedge fund managers who fled Manhattan to work from home could save millions, but they may also cost New York City dearly. Investment firms that pay the city's unincorporated business tax may be able to slash their bills because it's assessed on the bottom lines of businesses operating in New York City. Well, if city residents who fled the virus for second homes aren't counted in the census, the city could lose out on critical federal money and congressional seats. Only 46% of Upper East Side households have filled out census forms, according to a June 25th report from the Department of City Planning. Brummer's Chocolates, a popular family-owned candy shop in Westfield, New Jersey, is closing for good Saturday after 116 years in business. NJ.com says the business, located on East Broad Street, is owned by George Brummer. He's retiring after 47 years, according to a store Facebook post. That's your Bloomberg Tri-State Business Report. I'm Ed Corey.
All right, Ed, thank you. It is 5:38 on Wall Street. Bloomberg Radio is on the air from San Francisco to New York, London to Hong Kong. Let's check in with our global news team for some of the top stories heard on our 300 affiliate radio stations around the world.
I'm Jeff Bellinger, and on WIOD in Miami, I'm talking about KFC closing the dining rooms in its Florida stores because of the rise in coronavirus cases.
I'm Courtney Donahoe on KTRH in Houston. Oilfield services provider Calfrac has filed for bankruptcy on the decline in crude.
I'm Roger Hearing on Bloomberg DAB Digital Radio in London. We're reporting on the decision to remove Huawei from the UK's 5G network.
I'm Gina Cervetti, and for WFLA in Orlando, I'm reporting on another retail bankruptcy. This time, it's the parent of New York & Company.
I'm Steve Podoskin on 1010 Wins in New York. We're talking about earnings season getting underway with some of the biggest banks opening their quarterly books.
And those are some of the stories our 2,700 Bloomberg journalists and analysts are working on this morning around the world. Some other stories we're following. Users of the Robinhood platform that's loved by day traders can't get enough of Tesla. About 40,000 accounts added shares of the electric car maker in just 4 hours yesterday. Tesla was up 16% at one point before ending the day 3% lower. Shares have gained 56% over the past 10 days. And Amazon is telling workers at a New York warehouse that time spent washing hands won't be held against them. They also won't be penalized for falling short of quotas. Workers at the facility have gone on strike and sued over safety concerns. They say Amazon's policies have exacerbated the risk of contracting COVID-19. It is 5:40 on Wall Street. The latest edition of Bloomberg Business Week is the heist issue, including the empty frames that remain the art world's biggest mystery. You can find it online now. Terminal customers can receive a complimentary subscription at MAG Go. Listen to Business Week with Carol Nasser and Jason Kelly right here on Bloomberg Radio, or watch it on YouTube weekdays from 2 to 6 p.m. Wall Street time. Get global business, finance, and tech news on your TV, computer, or mobile device at youtube.com. Search Bloomberg Global News. S&P futures higher by 12 points. Dow futures up 111. This is Bloomberg.
The following is a message from PGIM.
Welcome to Outsea in 60, Perspectives from PGIM Thought Leaders. Here's Mark Baribeau, the head of global equity at Jennison Associates.
You're looking at bigger implications of technology playing a role in keeping us all connected, giving us access to information or goods very quickly. So we don't see any of those trends changing. In fact, they're likely to accelerate. There's some new things that have come along, though, that people might find useful, like telemedicine. There were skeptics about that, and I think the more people using it, especially the more doctors are using it today, the more they're liking it. You can see more patients, it can be more effective, it might actually be a better solution.
Hear more PGIM perspectives at pgim.com. That's pgim.com. Partner with PGIM, the investment management business of Prudential. These statements are not intended to be investment advice and should not be used as the basis for any investment decision.
What's the true value of your custodial relationship? Ben Harrison of BNY Mellon's Pershing explains.
As sophisticated investors demand more from their advisors, advisory firms, in turn, need to rely on their custodian to help them grow their complex businesses. At BNY Mellon's Pershing, supporting the rapid growth of RIAs is our number one priority. We understand what it means to deliver true value to our clients who are looking for a custodian that is aligned with their best interest and delivers high-value solutions, all in an open architecture environment with flexibility, choice, and transparency. Learn why so many of the largest advisory firms turn to us for the financial strength, resiliency, and high-touch service that BNY Mellon Pershing provides. When you work with Pershing, we put your business first. Can your custodian say that?
Learn more at Pershing.com or call 800-445-4467. Pershing Advisor Solutions, LLC, member FINRA SIPC.
This is your Bloomberg Real Estate.
When your tenants have a burst pipe and you've got a busy day ahead, superheroes crashing through the wall isn't going to help anyone. With Direct Line Landlord Emergency added to your policy, we're on it to send a rather super plumber in 4 hours before you've tucked into your lunch. We can also assemble locksmiths, glaziers, electricians and drainage engineers. Search Direct Line Landlord Emergency. We're on it. Direct Line. Residential properties. Optional add-on up to $1,500 per caller. Extreme weather conditions may extend response time. Underwritten by UK Insurance Limited.
As we open things up again, how do we keep safe? Max runs a cafe.
We've worked really hard to make the coffee shop COVID safe. Keep 2 meters apart, or 1 meter with extra precautions. Follow our new one-way system. Use the extra hand sanitizer, and try to stay at your table as much as possible. We can't wait to welcome everyone back, but please, remember the safety guidelines so we can all stay open.
Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Tuesday morning by the scruff of the neck. Ignore this gloomy weather and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview floor. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
Eurotunnel Le Shuttle is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, a safer way to France and beyond.
And action!
I was offered one.
Cut. That's not on the script.
I was offered one. Get in.
Ladies and gentlemen, I was offered one.
Come, boy. I was offered one.
Don't take our word for it. 9 out of 10 people said they were offered a great value deal with O2. Get yours today, in-store, online, or by phone.
I was offered one too. O2 Retail Exit Survey 309 of 348 agreed with the statement. O2 offered me a great value deal. For full verification, see o2.co.uk/terms.
4 hours a day, on air and at TikTok on Twitter. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. This is Bloomberg Radio. Now, a global news update.
The White House is fending off criticism of disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci.
White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany insists there is not a concerted effort to ridicule Dr. Fauci.
There's no opposition research being dumped to reporters. We were asked a very specific question by the Washington Post, and that question was, President Trump noted that Dr. Fauci had made some mistakes, and we provided a direct answer to what was a direct question.
But White House aides sent similar material to other news media, and the president's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, who wants China blamed and punished for the virus and who's pushing for the FDA to reauthorize hydroxychloroquine, has joined the cause. Navarro tells CBS News about Fauci, he's been wrong about everything I have ever interacted with him on. Bob Costantini, Washington.
As Texas struggles to contain COVID-19, voters head to the polls for runoff elections today. In New York, Jeffrey Epstein's alleged co-conspirator, Ghislaine Maxwell, will appear before a judge on sex trafficking charges. I'm John Trout.
It's a new disease making an unprecedented impact.
The job losses were widespread.
It is a stunningly historic moment.
Your best strategy?
Is this a market that's accepted reality?
Bloomberg Surveillance, weekday mornings at 7 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow. European stocks extending a global retreat and German bonds climbing as investors weigh the risks of the upcoming earnings season and economic hit of rising virus cases. S&P 500 and NASDAQ futures are pointing to a higher open after finishing in the red yesterday. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures up about 12 points. Dow futures up 102. NASDAQ futures up 43. The DAX in Germany is down 1.4%. 10-year Treasury down 2/30 seconds, yield 0.62%, and the yield on the 2-year 0.15%. NYMEX crude oil is down 0.7% or 27 cents at $39.83 a barrel. COMEX gold is down 0.6% or $11.20 at $18.0290 an ounce. The euro 1.1365 against the dollar, British pound 1.2523, and the yen at 107.31. And J.P. Morgan Chase, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo are among companies scheduled to report earnings today. And that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Michael Barr with more on what's going on around the world. Michael.
Karen, with COVID-19 rates rising in California, the state is looking back and will back down on new orders. Bars and movie theaters are closed again. In many areas, gyms, churches, hair salons, barbershops, and indoor malls are being ordered shut down. Los Angeles school districts are announcing schools will not reopen in the fall. The Trump administration rejected China's expansive maritime claims in the South China Sea, reversing a previous policy of not taking sides in such disputes and escalating tensions between Beijing on yet another front. Tom Bergeron And Erin Andrews will not be returning to host the 29th season of Dancing with the Stars. Bergeron has been with the show since 2005 and more than 400 episodes. Bergeron called the show the most unexpected gift of my career. Global news, 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
Wow. All right, Michael, thank you. It is 5:49 on Wall Street, live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios. This is Bloomberg Daybreak as we prepare for second quarter earnings season. It's about to kick off in just about an hour when the first of the big six banks reports results. It's like the Super Bowl for Bloomberg News finance correspondent Shonali Bosick. About to be the busiest person in Bloomberg headquarters. Good to have you with us this morning, Shonali. But this earnings season, I think just about all predictions are it's not going to be pretty, particularly given the loan loss provisions we saw at the end of the previous quarter.
Right. And I could give you all the estimates in the world, but that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. This quarter is going to be bad. It's hard to really estimate what a JP Morgan will say about their estimates based on what they expect the economy to look like at the end of the year. Wells Fargo comes after them. We expect very tough provisions there as well. The thing to watch out for is Wells Fargo going to post a loss? We haven't seen a banking loss in a long time. Remember last year, we were coming off of record numbers, so it's kind of hard to see something like that this quarter around.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the loan loss provisions have been the focal point for so many investors, but what are the potential bright spots we could see today?
Well, we know trading is a huge bright spot. We know that volumes have been skyrocketing even in the face of this whipsawing volatility in the markets. Retail traders are trading more. Fixed income markets are robust again after they haven't been in such a long time. I don't know how excited investors will get about the second quarter trading figures unless the big banks can give those investors a reason to be excited about trading in the future. It's not clear to anybody that these levels of growth are sustainable for these banks.
Well, even if investors were to get excited about it, it would probably be something that they would be excited about mainly for JP Morgan, right? I mean, they're the bank that's got the big exposure to trading revenue as opposed to the others that are going to report this morning.
Exactly. And JP Morgan, compared to all the banks, is kind of a flight to safety here. So I would call JP Morgan an outlier because they're fortress JP Morgan. The banks are trading at their worst level since 2008 relative to the financial crisis. Do they deserve that valuation right now? That's not clear either. They're not in the same shape as they were in the financial crisis. And into next year, we kind of know what the downside is. The question is the worst over for them?
Yeah, and I wonder whether we're going to be seeing any kind of clarity from any of these banks in terms of forward guidance to let analysts know whether the worst is over. Is there any expectation that they're going to give any kind of clear signal about what profitability could be like in the second half?
They could. I was very impressed with JP Morgan last quarter because they told you where the net interest income would come in the second quarter. So we shouldn't see too many surprises, at least on top-line revenue, right? They had let us know throughout the quarter where trading would fall. Citigroup as well let us know where underwriting would generally fall, right? We knew that they hit a record. On Bloomberg TV, they told us in the middle of the quarter. So there were some real bright spots here. James Gorman at Morgan Stanley has already said he believes the worst is over. Just nobody believes that the economy will jump back to where it was before immediately. Everyone expects problems on the horizon, but not as bad as they were at the beginning of the year.
All right, just quickly, you mentioned Wells Fargo possibly reporting a loss this quarter. Cost cutting has been a big issue for them. Could that be something in our last 15 seconds here that we could see across the board, the issue of cost cutting?
Yeah, so our own Hannah Levitt broke that last week. We won't see that necessarily at all the big banks right now. They're going to wait till the end of the year to make those decisions, but Wells Fargo is something we'll hear about.
All right. Bloomberg News finance correspondent Shonali Bosick. Again, those big three banks, the first of the three of the big six, begin to report later on this morning. We will have full coverage for you here on Bloomberg Radio. Karen?
Nathan, thank you. It is 5:53 on Wall Street. Time for the Bloomberg Law Report. Let's get to the legal stories we're watching this morning from Bloomberg's Jeff Bellinger.
A Washington appeals court refused to lift an injunction blocking the first federal execution in 17 years, but the Supreme Court ruled overnight that executions can proceed. It's not clear when a federal inmate will be executed. Several trademark squatters have registered names they think might be chosen by Washington's NFL team now that the team has decided to drop the Redskins name. The EPA is giving diesel engine makers a break from certain Clean Air Act requirements because of challenges caused by the pandemic.
Bloomberg Law. Everything you need on one legal research platform. Guidance, analysis, and Bloomberg Market Intelligence. Find out more at BloombergLaw.com.
And now another legal item we're watching includes the fallout from President Trump commuting the sentence of Roger Stone. The move spares the Republican operative from spending more than 3 years in federal lockup, but his legal journey is far from over. Stone is still appealing his conviction for lying to Congress and witness tampering, putting him at odds with the Justice Department. For more on the situation, Bloomberg's June Grasso speaks to former federal prosecutor Robert Mintz, a partner at McCarter & English.
Many presidents have faced criticism for how they used their pardon powers. Some say this particular pardon stands out because President Trump is granting clemency to someone who was convicted of lying to protect him, the president.
There have been other controversial pardons or commutations in the past. What sets this apart is that Roger Stone was the first one to be pardoned in connection with the investigation into the alleged ties between the Trump campaign and Russia and the dump of the WikiLeaks documents. So the argument for those who are critics of this decision is to say that Mr. Trump essentially rewarded somebody for not cooperating with prosecutors and perhaps withholding information ultimately could have led to charges against the president, or at least perhaps to have tied the president to information that showed that the Trump campaign had knowledge of these WikiLeaks dumps.
This means that the conviction against Stone is still intact. He's appealing his conviction, says he wants to overturn it and clear his name. What are the grounds for his appeal?
It also means that there'll be an odd circumstance here where the Attorney General and his Justice Department will continue to defend that conviction, despite the fact that the president has condemned the prosecution as being unfair. The issues on appeal are essentially that the charges were politically motivated. Mr. Stone has claimed that the charges were fabricated and that he was denied a fair trial by an unbiased judge and by an honest jury. So he is going after a sort of broad range of charges about the entire process being unfair.
And that's Robert Mintz, a partner at McCarter & English, speaking with Bloomberg's June Grasso. Catch more of that interview, plus analysis of the latest legal news, by subscribing to the Bloomberg Law Podcast or downloading the show at Bloomberg.com/podcast. And attorneys can find exceptional legal research and business development tools at BloombergLaw.com. And Bloomberg Daybreak is brought to you by SEI, with an operating platform designed to support all major asset classes, diverse strategies, and investment vehicles. SEI is redefining wealth management. Learn more at SEIC.com/IMS. S&P futures higher, up 9 points. Dow futures up 92. NASDAQ futures up 29. 10-year Treasury down 230 seconds, yield 0.62%, and the yield on the 2-year 0.15%. And NYMEX crude oil is down 0.8% at $39.79 a barrel. And Bloomberg Daybreak continues. This is Bloomberg.
Influential conversation.
How do we control coronavirus now? Listen to Claudia. She's a care worker.
I got the call from NHS Test and Trace. Told I'd been in contact with someone with coronavirus. Couldn't believe it. I had to isolate at home for 14 days. Couldn't go to work, couldn't go to the shops, couldn't get out to exercise. I didn't even feel ill. But you know what? To protect my family, my friends, my community, well, you just do it, don't you?
Stay alert, control the virus, save lives.
Eurotunnel Le Shuttle is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car, comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, a safer way to France and beyond.
Give yourself a Diet Coke break.
Hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is Bloomberg Radio.
Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios, this is Bloomberg Daybreak for Tuesday, July 14th, 2020. Coming up this hour.
California rolls back reopening measures as infections spike.
Cases in Florida threaten to strain Miami-Dade hospitals beyond capacity.
The debate over classroom learning heats up as big cities defy White House orders.
And Wall Street awaits second quarter results from some of the biggest banks.
New Jersey Transit lifts its 50% capacity limit on trains starting tomorrow, plus President Trump weighs in on his relationship with Dr. Fauci. I'm Michael Barr. More ahead.
I'm John Stashower in sports. A possible holdup to a new name in Washington, and a big NBA star has tested positive.
That's all straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak. On Bloomberg 1130 New York, Bloomberg 99.1 Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 106.1 Boston, Bloomberg 960 San Francisco, Sirius XM 119, and around the world on BloombergRadio.com and via the Bloomberg Business app.
Good morning, I'm Karen Moscow.
I'm Nathan Hager. Bloomberg Daybreak is brought to you by Witham, a forward-thinking advisory and accounting firm helping clients to be in a position of strength in the new reality of business. Learn about their innovative solutions by visiting witham.com.
And U.S. futures are gaining while stocks in Europe and Asia decline. 6:01 on Wall Street, and we check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures up 11 points, Dow futures up 100, and NASDAQ futures up 31. The DAX in Germany is down 1.5%, CAC in Paris down 1.6%, and the FTSE 100 down 0.25%. 10-year Treasury down 2/30 seconds, yield 0.62%, yield on the 2-year 0.15%. NYMEX crude oil is down 0.75% or 30 cents at $39.81 a barrel, and COMEX gold is down 0.7%. Nathan.
Karen, we begin in California, where the state is rolling back reopening measures. Governor Gavin Newsom is responding to rising infections by closing indoor activities.
Restaurants, wineries, tasting rooms, movie theaters, family entertainment centers, zoos and museums, card rooms, and the shuttering of all bars.
The move comes as California reports record hospitalizations, and Newsom says more restrictions could come for counties with increased exposure.
COVID-19 is not going away anytime soon until there is a vaccine and or an effective therapy.
California's reported more than 100,000 infections in the past 2 weeks, while hospitalizations have increased 28%.
In Florida, cases continue to rise at a blistering pace. Intensive care patients in Miami-Dade County hit a fresh record. The region currently has no plans for another lockdown, but Miami Mayor Francis Suarez is not taking it off the table.
You can't rule out the possibility of stay-at-home order, and so, we're analyzing it day in and day out to make a decision. But it's not something that I'm going to rule out at this point.
And when it comes to schools, Suarez says there's been no decision on indoor classes, though education officials are feeling pressure from the state.
The education commissioner of the state of Florida has mandated that schools be open, but I'm not sure that our superintendent is in agreement with that, and certainly, not if it poses a risk to our children or to the parents who are teaching.
Miami's mayor says the city's hospital system is strained with little to no capacity left at intensive care units.
Cities and states across the country are grappling with how to teach classes this fall. The White House is pushing for in-person learning, but the second largest district in the country has decided not to return kids to classrooms.
We must prevent gatherings and should only open when it is safe for our students, our staff, our teachers, and our families.
L.A. Mayor Eric Garcetti is moving classes online to start the year. So is San Diego. The move comes in direct opposition to President Trump, who has made reopening schools one of his top priorities.
New York is laying out criteria to resume in-person learning. Governor Andrew Cuomo says regions can restart classes if they meet certain reopening and infection rate metrics.
You're in phase 4.
and you're under 5% infection rate. That means the virus is under control.
And that means you can restart classes, but Cuomo is leaving the door open to move learning back online if those metrics don't hold.
Schools will close if the regional infection rate is above 9% on a 7-day average.
Governor Cuomo is criticizing President Trump for pushing states to reopen schools. He says the administration is denying the reality of the situation.
In Maryland, Governor Larry Hogan is also grappling with how to resume classes.
Everybody wants to get kids back to school because it's so important that we get them back learning again. But we've got to do it in a safe way.
While no decision's been made, Hogan tells us he expects to deploy a combination of virtual and in-class learning this fall.
We're going to come up with a plan that's probably going to be some kind of a hybrid that makes sure that we get our kids educated and back to school, but in a very safe way.
Hogan's also pushing for aid from the federal government, saying Maryland risks losing 4 million jobs without it. On that front, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he'll likely introduce a new stimulus bill as soon as next week.
Turning to markets now, stocks in Asia and Europe are lower. Sentiment in Asia soured overnight as tensions between the U.S. and China ramped up again. The White House is rejecting Beijing's claims in the South China Sea. And here with more on the market moves is Bloomberg's Juliette Sally in Singapore. Good morning, Juliette.
Good morning, Karen and Nathan. China's CSI 300 retreated from Monday's levels despite positive June trade data, while the Chinex index saw losses of more than 3% intraday as volatility picks up in China's most overheated stocks. In Hong Kong, stocks fell as more restrictions came in following a tick-up in virus cases. The Nikkei 225 fell 0.9% following Monday's more than 2% gain, while markets were lower in Sydney and slightly weaker in Seoul. In Singapore, Juliette Sali, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Juliette, thanks. Back here in the U.S., investors await earnings from big banks. J.P. Morgan, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo report this morning. Here with more is Bloomberg's Larry Kofsky.
All eyes will be on the bank's defense mechanisms to counter the fallout from the coronavirus pandemic, and loan loss provisions, which surged in the first quarter as pandemic lockdowns took hold, are expected to climb further. Nationwide stay-at-home orders are also expected to have reduced income from service charges and credit card fees, a cornerstone of the bank's growth in recent years. Analysts expect a profit of about $1.04 per share at J.P. Morgan Chase and 38 cents at Citigroup. Wells Fargo is projected to lose about 7 cents. Larry Kofsky, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Larry, thank you. Again, S&P futures are higher, up 11 points. Dow futures up 96, and NASDAQ futures up 33. The euro, 1.1357 against the dollar. The British pound, 1.2514, and the yen at 107.34. And COMEX gold is down 0.75% at $1,800.40 an ounce. Straight ahead, the latest world and national news. This is Bloomberg.
Thanks, Karen. It's 6:07 on Wall Street, and Michael Barr has more on what's going on around the world. Michael?
Thank you very much, Nathan. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy says his state will lift the 50% capacity limit on NJ Transit trains and private carrier buses beginning 8 p.m. tomorrow. Murphy says more people are now heading back to offices, and the state is still flattening the curve.
We are seeing increases in ridership, which are beginning to approach 50% of the stated maximum capacity of these vehicles, and we want to ensure that people are able to get to their jobs and that the system continues operating as efficiently as possible.
Murphy says face coverings must be worn on trains and at stations. New York City will redouble efforts to educate young people about the importance of wearing masks and keeping socially distant after a rise in cases among those ages 20 to 29. Top infectious disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci linked the surge in U.S. coronavirus cases to the country's failure to shut down completely and then rush to reopen too soon. Speaking at California's Stanford School of Medicine, Fauci says a full lockdown to get control of the virus in the U.S. isn't necessary.
If we step back, you don't necessarily need to shut down again, but pull back a bit and then proceed in a very prudent way of observing the guidelines of going from step to step.
President Donald Trump says he has a very good relationship with Dr. Fauci, but does not always agree with him. Trump has been increasingly critical of government health officials and their guidance. It was a violent Monday in New York City. At least 17 people were shot, a tally that would be considered high for a weekend day, but officers say that is astronomical for early in the week. The New York Post reports in Brooklyn alone there was a total of 12 victims. A federal judge is demanding more information about President Trump's decision to commute the prison sentence of longtime ally Roger Stone. The president stands by his decision despite some GOP pushback.
I'm getting rave reviews for what I did for Roger Stone.